My daughter's fiancé smiled when his mother glanced at my hands. She loudly declared that they knew I was a single father, but looking at my worn appearance, they finally understood why my wife left. My daughter folded her napkin twice, looked at the floor, and begged me not to make things awkward for her new family. I did not yell. I stood up and walked out before they saw my name on the deed to the building they were sitting in. Before I tell you how I tore their elite world to the ground, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone of your true worth. The ambient lighting of the Le Blanc dining room cast sharp shadows across the crystal glassware. I sat perfectly still in my stiff brown suit. It was the only formal suit I owned. Across the meticulously set table sat my daughter Danielle, her fiancé Blake, and Blake's mother Patricia. Patricia wore a silk dress that cost more than a reliable used car. She swirled her expensive red wine and stared directly at my hands. My knuckles rested on the white tablecloth. They were permanently scarred and thickly calloused. Patricia sighed loudly. She made sure the neighboring tables could hear her. She announced that Danielle's success was nothing short of a miracle. She claimed it was an absolute statistical anomaly for a girl to survive an impoverished father-only upbringing and secure a position at a respectable firm. I looked down at the deep scars crossing my palms. Those scars paid for Danielle's pristine life. I spent 20 consecutive years working brutal overnight shifts at the harbor. I loaded heavy cargo pallets by hand from dusk until dawn to secure her Ivy League tuition. I made sure she never took a single student loan. I bit my tongue to keep the peace. I wanted to give my daughter a joyful evening. Blake chuckled softly. He adjusted his platinum watch. He agreed with his mother, stating that Danielle had completely outgrown her humble roots. He patted Danielle's shoulder as if she were a rescued charity case. I took a slow breath. I focused on the ice melting in my water glass. I reminded myself that I was sitting in this pretentious restaurant solely for Danielle. I remained silent. Patricia noticed my silence. She perceived it as weakness. She leaned forward to deliver a deeper strike. She wanted to establish an absolute hierarchy before the wedding. She demanded total submission from the man she viewed as a peasant. I kept my posture straight. I did not let her arrogant gaze intimidate me. Patricia set her wine glass down with a sharp clink. She leaned forward, resting her manicured fingers on the table. She looked me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. She stated that any woman with standard social grace would have abandoned a man of my low caliber. She weaponized my deceased wife's absence to score a conversational point. She loudly proclaimed that it made perfect sense why I was forced to raise Danielle entirely alone. The air left my lungs. My wife died of a sudden illness when Danielle was an infant. She did not leave me. She was ripped away. I turned my head and looked directly at Danielle. I waited for the daughter I raised to speak up. I waited for her to defend her mother's memory. I waited for her to defend the father who sacrificed his youth for her success. Danielle lowered her head. She refused to meet my eyes. She slowly folded her linen napkin twice and placed it on her lap. She leaned closer to me and whispered a frantic plea. She begged me not to cause a scene. She asked me not to embarrass her new family. Blake smirked victoriously. He draped his arm around Danielle's chair, claiming ownership of her compliance. The betrayal struck me harder than any physical blow I had ever endured. I realized in that exact moment that my daughter's fear of losing her high society status had completely eclipsed her loyalty to me. She chose their cruel wealth over my unconditional love. I realized I was no longer a father to her. I was an inconvenient prop. My presence was merely a final hurdle she had to clear before fully integrating into Blake's elite world. She was willing to let them erase my dignity just to secure her place in their family. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. The daughter I raised was gone. She traded her moral compass for a platinum ring. I knew right then that reasoning with her was completely pointless. She had joined their ranks. She adopted their vicious worldview. I opened my eyes. The table felt incredibly cold. I stood up smoothly. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam my fists on the table. I simply placed my napkin on the seat of my chair. I looked at Danielle one last time, turned around, and walked directly out of the restaurant. I stepped out the front doors and walked into the freezing parking lot. I reached my battered sedan. Heavy, rapid footsteps slapped against the concrete behind me. Blake intercepted me before I could unlock the door. He did not offer an apology for his mother's abhorrent behavior. He stood inches from my face and demanded the physical checkbook for the wedding fund. He ordered me to hand it over immediately so he could finalize the catering vendors. I stared at him. I refused to hand over my property. I stated clearly that I already paid the $50,000 deposit for the Grand Plaza venue 3 months ago. I reminded him that the contract was fully signed and the vendors were already secured. Blake laughed coldly. He crossed his arms and looked at my rusty car with sheer disgust. He revealed that he and Patricia canceled my venue entirely. They hijacked the $50,000 deposit by invoking Danielle's name. They transferred the funds directly into Patricia's private account to secure the Royal Country Club instead. He declared that my original venue was entirely too cheap for his elite network. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his tailored jacket and shoved it firmly against my chest. He pulled out a revised guest list. He declared my side of the family was entirely banned from the ceremony to avoid ruining the corporate aesthetics. He demanded an additional $50,000 to cover the new catering costs. He ordered me to act purely as a silent bank. I flatly refused to fund another cent. I unlocked my car door. Blake stepped forward, physically blocking the door. He threatened to legally ban me from the ceremony. He promised I would never walk Danielle down the aisle or see my future grandchildren. He promised I would die entirely alone. Blake walked away. I sat in my cold car. I realized the wedding was a smokescreen for a severe financial extraction. I started the engine. The time for silent endurance was over. I drove into the night, preparing to unleash absolute devastation upon their stolen empire. I kept my hands firmly inside my coat pockets. I stared directly into Blake's eyes as the freezing wind whipped across the asphalt. I told him he would not get the physical checkbook. I stated clearly that the financial obligations for the wedding were already settled. I wrote a cashier's check for $50,000 exactly 3 months ago. I personally handed that check to the event coordinator at the Grand Plaza. The contract was signed, the date was locked, and the vendors were fully secured. Blake let out a sharp, mocking laugh. His breath plumed in the cold air. He shook his head and looked at my rusty sedan with undisguised revulsion. He crossed his arms over his tailored cashmere coat. He informed me that the Grand Plaza was entirely unacceptable for his elite network. He called the venue a dilapidated banquet hall fit only for lower-class reunions. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. He revealed that he and Patricia had completely canceled my venue reservation 2 days ago. My chest tightened. I demanded to know how he canceled a contract bearing my signature. Blake smirked and stated that Danielle signed an authorization release. They used my daughter's name to void the agreement and request a full refund. He did not stop there. He coldly explained that the $50,000 did not return to my account. They intercepted the refund and routed the entire sum directly into Patricia's private bank account. They used my hard-earned money to secure a down payment at the Royal Country Club instead. They hijacked my capital to upgrade their social status without my consent. My jaw clenched as the reality of his theft set in. It took me years of brutal labor on the loading docks to save that initial $50,000. Every cent represented a night I spent away from my daughter so she could have a better future. I realized my future son-in-law was not just an arrogant snob. He was a highly calculated thief. He manipulated my daughter into aiding a financial heist disguised as a wedding upgrade. He stole my money and expected me to thank him for the privilege. Blake reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a thick sheet of folded cardstock. He stepped forward and shoved the stiff paper forcefully against my chest. I caught it before it hit the freezing concrete. I unfolded the heavy paper under the dim glow of the street lamp. It was the revised guest list. I scanned the names printed in elegant silver ink. I looked for my brother, my cousins, and the community leaders who had supported Danielle since she was a child. Every single name from my side of the family was gone. They were completely erased from the document. I demanded an explanation for the sudden erasure of my bloodline from my only daughter's wedding. Blake did not flinch. He stated with absolute clinical detachment that my relatives simply did not fit the corporate aesthetics of the Royal Country Club. He claimed that having my blue-collar family mingling with his father's billionaire investors would create a catastrophic image problem for his brokerage firm. He told me that my family was an aesthetic liability. He viewed my people as a stain on his perfect society event. He then delivered his next command with breathtaking arrogance. He stated that the Royal Country Club required an immediate secondary deposit for their elite catering service. He demanded another $50,000 by tomorrow morning. He ordered me to act purely as a silent bank. I was expected to fund the illusion of their massive wealth while remaining entirely invisible in the background. I looked at the guest list in my hand. I thought about the decades I spent working double shifts at the freight yards, inhaling diesel fumes, and breaking my back so Danielle would never feel inferior to men like Blake. I had built a fortress of security for her. Blake was now using that exact fortress to lock me out of her life. He wanted my money to buy his social elevation. He wanted my absolute silence to ensure his total control over the narrative. He was attempting to erase my existence while draining my bank account. He expected me to write a blank check for my own humiliation. I folded the heavy cardstock perfectly in half. I looked at the man who thought he could buy my submission. I crushed the silver-inked guest list in my fist. I dropped the crumpled ball onto the icy asphalt at his feet. I looked Blake dead in the eye and flatly refused to fund another cent of his fraudulent spectacle. I told him the bank was officially closed. I turned my back to him, pulled my keys from my pocket, and unlocked my car door. Blake moved with startling speed. He slammed his heavy hand against the roof of my sedan, physically blocking the door from opening. His polished mask of corporate civility vanished completely. His eyes burned with venomous, unhinged rage. He leaned down and whispered a devastating threat directly into my ear. He promised that if I cut the funding, he would invoke his legal connections to ban me from the ceremony. He vowed I would never walk Danielle down the aisle. He swore he would manipulate her so thoroughly that I would never be allowed to see my future grandchildren. He promised I would die exactly as I had lived, entirely alone and forgotten. He held my gaze for one long, silent second to ensure the threat sank deep into my bones. Then he turned around and walked back toward the glowing entrance of the restaurant, adjusting his tie as if he had just closed a routine business deal. I opened the door and sat inside the freezing cabin of my car. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with terrifying clarity. This was never about a wedding. The hostility, the hijacked deposit, the sudden venue change, the forced isolation. It was all a highly coordinated smokescreen for a severe financial extraction. Blake was testing the waters to see how much capital he could drain from me before I fought back. I started the engine. The engine roared to life in the quiet lot. I shifted the car into gear. I was not going to let a spoiled corporate broker dismantle my family and steal my legacy. I drove into the night. I navigated my battered sedan through the quiet, freezing suburban streets. The streetlights cast long, moving shadows across the dashboard. I parked in my narrow driveway and turned off the ignition. The engine ticked as it cooled in the bitter night air. I walked into my house and locked the heavy deadbolt behind me. The silence inside felt absolute. I hung my coat on the brass hook by the door. I walked into the kitchen and sat at the small wooden table. The surface was deeply worn from decades of use. I placed my cell phone squarely in the center of the table. I stared at the black screen. I waited for my daughter to call. I expected Danielle to break away from Blake's influence for just 1 minute to apologize. I needed her to tell me she did not agree with her new family's cruel ambush. I sat completely still for 3 hours. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, then past 2 in the morning. The phone remained perfectly dark. It did not vibrate. It did not ring. The prolonged silence delivered a devastating truth. Danielle was not a hostage. She was a willing participant in my erasure. Blake completely controlled her communication. He effectively severed her from her past. He convinced her that absolute loyalty to his elite circle required my total exclusion. She chose the comfort of his luxury over the man who raised her. The quiet kitchen felt colder than the parking lot. I realized I could no longer protect her through passive endurance. Allowing them to abuse me did not keep the peace. It only emboldened a predator. Blake thought he had successfully neutralized me by attacking my pride. He believed a blue-collar father possessed no leverage against his corporate empire. He made a catastrophic miscalculation. I refused to be a casualty of his arrogance. I remembered the nights I sat up with her when she was sick, the immense sacrifices I made to ensure she never felt the sting of poverty. She traded that lifetime of devotion for an invitation to a country club. She allowed Patricia to mock my hands, the very hands that built her foundation. The silence of the phone was her final answer. She had chosen her side. I pushed my chair back and stood up from the table. I walked down the narrow hallway to my master bedroom. I knelt on the floor and pulled back the edge of the woven area rug. I pried loose a specific hidden oak floorboard. I reached into the dark cavity and pulled out a heavy steel lockbox. I unlocked the thick padlock with a silver key I kept on a chain around my neck. I opened the lid. I bypassed the stacks of emergency cash and extracted a heavy, leather-bound ledger. I carried the thick book back to the kitchen table and turned on the overhead light. I opened the first page. The numbers printed inside represented my actual life's work. I was not an impoverished freight loader. I spent my 20s working brutal physical shifts to secure basic survival. I spent the next 4 decades quietly acquiring the exact supply chains I used to load. I bought bankrupt trucking fleets, refurbished them, and secured exclusive regional shipping contracts. I built a massive, untraceable logistics empire. I operated entirely in the shadows through private holding companies and silent proxy boards. I lived in a modest house and drove a rusted car to ensure no one ever targeted my family for our wealth. I funneled the vast majority of my profits into an ironclad trust fund. I constructed that financial fortress specifically for Danielle. I designed it to grant her absolute generational power when she reached full maturity. Blake saw my cheap suit and assumed I was a financial liability. He thought my $50,000 wedding deposit was the absolute limit of my capital. He judged a book by a cover I purposefully distressed. He assumed my silence at the dinner table was a sign of intellectual inferiority. I ran my scarred finger down the columns of accumulated millions. My wealth was a loaded weapon. I had shielded Danielle from the corrupting influence of money her entire life. Now, that same money was the only tool I had left to dismantle the men trying to ruin her. It was time to pull the trigger. I reached back into the steel box and pulled out a stack of sealed envelopes. They were the most recent banking statements I collected from my private post office box earlier that week. I tore open the primary envelope containing the trust fund activity. I spread the crisp papers across the kitchen table next to the ledger. I cross-referenced the ledger balances with the printed statements. My eyes locked onto the third page. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. A terrifying discrepancy glared at me in stark black ink. I traced the routing numbers for a massive pending transfer. The digits did not match the authorized wedding vendor accounts. The destination routing code belonged to an offshore private corporate holding entity. Blake did not merely hijack a $50,000 venue deposit. He had bypassed the primary security protocols of the trust fund entirely. A catastrophic financial breach had occurred while I sat patiently at that dinner table. The venue cancellation was a deliberate distraction. It was a calculated maneuver to keep my attention focused on a minor, insulting theft, while he orchestrated a massive extraction in the background. He utilized his position as Danielle's fiancé to gain access to the routing architecture. The sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light through the kitchen window. I slammed the ledger shut. I swept the bank statements into a leather briefcase and snapped the locks. I grabbed my heavy winter coat off the brass hook. I marched out the front door and threw myself into the driver's seat of my sedan. I shoved the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into gear and sped away from my quiet suburban street. The morning commute had not yet begun. The roads were completely empty. I pressed the accelerator harder, feeling the powerful engine hum beneath the rusted hood of my sedan. I had meticulously engineered every failsafe within that trust. For Blake to initiate a transfer of this magnitude, he needed an internal authorization code. He needed Danielle to willingly sign over her own protection. The realization burned through my veins. He did not just steal from me. He weaponized my daughter's blind trust to dismantle her future. I drove aggressively toward the towering glass skyline of the financial district. The skyscrapers reflected the cold morning sun. Blake thought he was dealing with a helpless, uneducated old man. He thought his corporate pedigree made him untouchable. He was about to face the architect of the very empire he was trying to steal. I would not allow him to take another breath in my daughter's life without severe consequence. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors of the First National Bank exactly as the grandfather clock in the lobby struck 8. The morning rush had just begun. Wealthy businessmen in tailored suits lined up patiently behind the velvet ropes. I did not stop. I did not wait in the public teller line. I walked directly past the armed security desk and pushed open the frosted glass doors of the private executive wing. My heavy boots sank into the plush carpet as I marched straight toward the corner suite. The gold nameplate on the door read Oliver Senior Wealth Manager. I pushed the door open without knocking. Oliver sat behind a massive mahogany desk. He wore a crisp navy suit. The moment he saw me, the blood completely drained from his face. He jumped up from his leather chair so fast he knocked over his expensive coffee mug. Dark liquid spilled across his pristine desk pad. He did not bother to wipe it up. He immediately reached forward and slammed his laptop monitor shut. He moved with the frantic, jerky motion of a man caught committing a severe crime. He stammered a greeting, his voice cracking under the sudden pressure. He asked why I did not call ahead to schedule an appointment. I ignored his weak pleasantries. I stepped entirely into the room and closed the heavy door behind me until it clicked shut. I stared directly at his shaking hands resting on the closed laptop. I told him I did not need an appointment to access my own life savings. Oliver swallowed hard. He tried to force a professional smile, but his eyes darted nervously toward the closed screen. He stepped sideways, physically attempting to block my view of his desk terminal. He knew exactly why I was standing in his office at dawn. He knew I had seen the preliminary statements. He was terrified of the man standing in front of him, because he knew I possessed the power to destroy his career with a single phone call. I stepped around the spilled coffee and ordered Oliver to open the master trust file immediately. I demanded absolute transparency. I warned him that any attempt to stall or lie would result in severe legal consequences for his entire branch. Oliver hesitated for one terrifying second. He looked at my face, realized I was entirely serious, and slowly flipped the laptop open. His fingers trembled violently as he typed his administrative password into the secure terminal. He turned the monitor toward me. He took a deep, shaky breath and confessed everything. He revealed that Danielle walked into the branch yesterday afternoon. She did not come alone. Blake marched in right beside her, dictating every single movement she made. Oliver explained that Blake did not officially touch the paperwork. He did not have to. He stood over Danielle's shoulder and instructed her exactly where to sign. He used her deep emotional dependence to bypass my security protocols. Oliver looked down at his shoes as he delivered the final devastating blow. He stated that Danielle utilized her legal status as the primary beneficiary of the estate. She invoked a specific clause I had written into the trust to protect her in case of medical emergencies. She authorized a massive collateral withdrawal. She effectively bypassed the 30-day holding period by signing an immediate release waiver. Oliver's voice dropped to a frantic whisper. He claimed he tried to stop her. He said he begged Danielle to call me before finalizing the transaction. He told her the withdrawal would trigger a catastrophic shift in the trust's foundational architecture. Blake immediately intervened. He threatened to file a formal complaint against Oliver for obstructing a legal beneficiary. He manipulated the bank's own compliance rules to force the transaction through. Danielle sat silently while Blake bullied the manager into submission. She allowed her fiancé to dismantle the financial fortress I spent 40 years building for her protection. She signed her name on the dotted line without a single moment of hesitation. I placed my hands on the edge of the mahogany desk and stared at the glowing screen. I read the transaction history line by line. The numbers glaring back at me were absolutely staggering. Blake had manipulated Danielle into leveraging the entire 40-year accumulation of her inheritance. He did not just take a small loan to cover the wedding venue. He drained $3 million in pure liquid capital. The sheer magnitude of the theft made the air leave my lungs. I spent decades working double shifts, breaking my back on the loading docks and silently acquiring logistics companies so Danielle would never have to worry about survival. I lived a life of deliberate poverty to ensure her absolute financial supremacy. In one single afternoon, Blake liquidated my blood and sweat to line his own pockets. I traced the sequence of the transactions. He drained the safest, most secure bonds first. He stripped the liquidity out of the trust like a parasite draining a host. I realized the horrifying truth. My daughter was not just paying for an upgraded wedding venue. She was actively funding her own financial ruin. Blake used her signature to transform her inheritance into his personal slush fund. He stripped away her safety net and left her completely exposed to his greed. I looked away from the screen and locked eyes with Oliver. The fear in his face confirmed that the nightmare was far from over. The $3 million did not simply vanish into thin air. It had a highly specific destination. I needed to know exactly where Blake hid my money. I lean over the mahogany desk, demanding Oliver follow the digital paper trail immediately. Oliver's fingers fly across his keyboard in a frantic rhythm. He pulls up the destination account for the $3 million. I stare at the glowing screen. The money did not route into a standard joint checking account for newlywed expenses. It bypassed every conventional financial safeguard. The funds funneled directly into a high-yield corporate receiving account. I read the beneficiary details out loud. The receiving entity is listed as Apex Pinnacle Holdings. I command Oliver to unmask the registered agents for that specific limited liability company. Oliver complies without hesitation. The screen refreshes instantly. A single name populates the ownership registry. Patricia. My blood runs absolutely cold in my veins. Blake did not just steal my daughter's future to fund an extravagant wedding ceremony. He legally transferred $3 million of my hard-earned capital directly into his mother's private control. Patricia now holds Danielle's entire inheritance in an untraceable corporate vault. I remember the vile way Patricia looked at my scarred hands at the restaurant. She judged me for my blue-collar appearance while she was actively orchestrating the theft of my life savings. Blake utilized Danielle's infatuation to bypass my rigorous security measures. He manipulated her into signing a transfer that stripped her of all financial autonomy. He handed the keys to her future directly to the woman who despised her origins. The money sits in Patricia's holding account ready to be deployed for their own greedy ambitions. I ask Oliver what Patricia intends to do with that massive level of capital. Oliver swallows hard. His throat bobs visibly above his crisp collar. He reaches into his locked desk drawer. He pulls out a heavily redacted, thick dossier. He states he ran a routine risk assessment on Blake's financial background the moment Danielle initiated the transfer. He wanted to understand why a supposedly wealthy corporate broker suddenly required $3 million in liquid cash. The truth inside that folder is devastating. Oliver hands me the comprehensive background check. I flip open the thick file and scan the executive summary. The entire illusion of Blake's elite corporate status is a complete fabrication. Blake is not a successful broker. His firm is secretly catastrophically bankrupt. He spent the last 2 years bleeding capital on terrible high-risk investments. He desperately tried to secure institutional backing for a massive legacy-defining real estate project. The major banks looked at his toxic ledger and denied him outright. His credit is entirely radioactive. I read the primary project proposal attached to the financial autopsy. Blake requires absolute capital to purchase the master commercial lease for the highly coveted Harbor View district. It is a billion-dollar municipal development project located directly on the prime waterfront. Securing that specific lease is the only viable way Blake can save his sinking ship. It represents his golden ticket to avoid federal bankruptcy and total public humiliation. He needed a clean, untraceable influx of cash to satisfy the city council's massive down payment requirements. He found his perfect target in Danielle. He courted my daughter specifically to access the generational wealth I built for her protection. He systematically isolated her from my influence. He convinced her that tapping her trust fund was a sophisticated investment in their shared future. In reality, he used her as a human financial shield. He drained the trust to buy the Harbor View commercial operating rights. Patricia acts as the primary holding agent to keep the stolen asset legally divorced from Blake's toxic corporate debts. They constructed a flawless, predatory extraction scheme. They stole my daughter's safety net to buy a piece of the city's skyline. I dropped the background check onto the polished wood of the desk. The sheer audacity of their plan crystallizes my rage into absolute, unbreakable focus. I will not allow a desperate failing broker to construct a real estate empire on my daughter's broken back. I slam my heavy fist against the solid mahogany desk. The loud sound echoes sharply in the quiet, pressurized office. I issue a direct, uncompromising command. I order Oliver to freeze the accounts immediately. I instruct him to initiate an emergency block on the pending wire transfers. The funds must not clear Patricia's holding company under any circumstances. I demand he lock down the entire trust architecture right now. Oliver physically recoils from my strike. He shrinks back into his leather chair. He does not touch his keyboard. He shakes his head slowly from side to side. He refuses to execute my order. I narrow my eyes and step closer, casting a shadow over him. I remind him that I am the sole architect and the original funder of this trust. I demand compliance. Oliver opens a separate locked drawer on his right side. He pulls out a highly fortified legal document printed on thick watermarked paper. He slides it across the smooth desk surface toward me. He states clearly that he cannot legally intervene. The trap snaps shut around my neck. I pick up the heavy document. The bold header clearly identifies it as a total administrative waiver. Danielle's signature sits prominently at the bottom of the page in bright blue ink. Oliver explains that Blake brought his own aggressive corporate lawyers into the bank yesterday. They drafted an impenetrable legal barrier. Danielle legally revoked my administrative oversight over the trust. She voluntarily stripped me of my status as the protective custodian. I am completely locked out of my own life's work. The money is gone. I hold the heavy watermarked paper in my calloused hands. The bold black letters at the top of the page dictate a total transfer of administrative authority. I stare at the bright blue ink at the bottom of the final sheet. The signature belongs unmistakably to Danielle. I recognize the slight curve of the letters she practiced endlessly at our kitchen table when she was in high school. That familiar handwriting now serves as the exact instrument of my financial execution. Blake did not just lock me out of a bank account, he engineered a flawless legal barricade using my own daughter as the primary contractor. I read the specific clauses embedded in the dense legal jargon. Blake brought a team of aggressive corporate litigators into the branch to construct this impenetrable wall. They drafted an irrevocable waiver of custodian oversight. The document explicitly strips me of all rights to monitor, freeze, or distribute the capital I spent 4 decades accumulating. I demand Oliver explain how this specific document bypassed our foundational security protocols. Oliver wipes a bead of sweat from his temple. He stammers that Blake invoked a dormant emancipation clause. I originally designed that specific clause to protect Danielle from predatory state taxes in the event of my sudden death. Blake twisted my protective shield into a sword. He convinced Danielle that signing the waiver was a standard prerequisite for establishing their joint marital estate. He stood right beside her and guided her hand. Danielle willingly revoked my status as the protective custodian of her future. She handed the absolute keys to her financial kingdom directly to the man rushing to bankrupt her. The brutal reality of the document paralyzes me. I cannot simply hit a digital override switch. Blake legally severed my connection to the trust fund. I look at Oliver sitting defensively behind his mahogany desk. He refuses to meet my gaze. He knows he allowed a predator to walk into his branch and dismantle my legacy. The $3 million sit in a digital purgatory waiting for the final clearing protocol. I slam the document back onto the desk. The paper slides across the polished wood and hits Oliver's keyboard. I refuse to accept defeat in a room built by my own money. I order Oliver to initiate a manual override immediately. I command him to rip the funds back from Patricia's holding company regardless of the paperwork. Oliver physically recoils from the document. He shakes his head frantically. He states with absolute certainty that bypassing the waiver is professional suicide. I lean forward and threaten to liquidate every single asset I hold within his entire banking network. I promise to collapse his branch by withdrawing my silent logistical portfolios before noon. Oliver raises his hands in a desperate plea for reason. He explains the precise legal reality Blake constructed. If I force a manual freeze on the transferring funds, Blake will retaliate instantly. He already placed his corporate attorneys on standby. Oliver reveals that Blake prepared a secondary legal strike explicitly designed to destroy us both. If the $3 million do not clear Patricia's account today, Blake will file an immediate injunction against me for tortious interference. He will drag me into a brutal, highly publicized civil lawsuit. Oliver clarifies that the tortious interference suit would freeze the remaining assets in the trust for years during the litigation. Blake would utilize the discovery process to expose my hidden logistics companies. He would drag my entire silent empire into the brutal light of public scrutiny. Furthermore, he will officially accuse me of financial sabotage and frame me as a controlling, abusive father desperately trying to financially imprison his adult daughter. Blake intends to orchestrate a media spectacle. He will leak the lawsuit to the social elite circles Danielle desperately craves. He will ensure her name is dragged through the mud alongside mine. He will brand her as a helpless victim of an unhinged patriarch, permanently ruining her reputation among the corporate aristocrats. Blake is holding my daughter's social standing entirely hostage. He knows I spent my entire life shielding Danielle from public humiliation. He knows I worked overnight freight shifts so she could walk through Ivy League campuses without carrying the stigma of poverty. He is weaponizing my fundamental instinct to protect her against my desire to stop his theft. If I stop the money, I destroy Danielle's public life. If I let the money go, I fund the man plotting to ruin her privately. Oliver stares at me, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. He tells me the federal wire transfer is actively queued in the system. The clearing window closes in less than 10 minutes. The banking terminal on his desk blinks with a steady, unforgiving green light. The system requires a single administrative keystroke to finalize the transaction. Blake engineered a flawless hostage situation. He locked me in a room with 2 catastrophic choices. I stand completely still in the quiet executive office. I stare down at the bright blue signature of the daughter I protected for 30 years. I feel the deep, permanent scars on my palms. I built this immense financial fortress to ensure Danielle would possess insurmountable power. I must now allow her to lose a battle so I can win the impending war. I make a chilling absolute decision. I step back from the mahogany desk. I look directly into Oliver's terrified eyes. I issue my final command. I order him to process the wire transfer. I instruct him to let the $3 million clear the federal system and route entirely into Patricia's corporate shell company. Oliver exhales a massive breath of relief. His trembling fingers strike the keyboard. The green light on the terminal flashes rapidly. The funds vanish from the trust ledger. The vault is officially breached. Blake has successfully purchased the commercial lease for the Harbor View district. I turn my back on Oliver without another word. I push open the frosted glass doors and march out of the executive suite. I ignore the wealthy businessmen standing in the lobby. I walk through the heavy revolving doors and step back into the freezing morning air. The icy wind hits my face, sharpening my focus into a lethal point. Blake believes he has effectively neutralized me. He thinks taking my capital makes him invincible. He fails to understand the fundamental mechanics of the real estate empire he is trying to build. He purchased a municipal operating lease with stolen cash. He does not own the physical ground beneath his grand project. I walk toward my battered sedan parked on the busy city street. The initial shock of the theft evaporates completely. A new, devastating counter-strategy forms in my mind based purely on aggressive property law. I unlock my car door and slide into the driver's seat. I will let Blake construct his fragile glass castle. I will buy the dirt he builds it on. I pull my phone from my pocket to summon my corporate attorney. I navigated my car through the dense morning traffic toward the affluent skyline of the city. I did not return to my quiet suburban neighborhood. I drove directly to the glittering glass high-rise where Danielle lived. Blake convinced her to move into that luxurious penthouse 6 months ago to reflect their new corporate image. I pulled into the loading zone and left my car idling. I marched through the revolving glass doors and bypassed the polished marble concierge desk. The uniformed guard called out to me demanding my identification. I ignored him completely. I stepped into the private resident elevator and hit the button for the top floor. I rode up in absolute silence, my anger hardening into a cold, unbreakable resolve. The doors opened to a private foyer decorated with modern art I knew Danielle did not choose. I walked up to the heavy oak door of the penthouse and hammered my fist against the solid wood. I did not ring the polite silver bell. I slammed my knuckles against the timber until my hands physically ached. The deadbolt clicked loudly. The door swung open. Blake stood in the threshold. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, adjusting his cuffs with supreme arrogance. He did not look surprised to see me. He looked entirely inconvenienced. He stepped forward, planting his expensive leather shoes firmly across the doorframe. He used his tall, broad frame as an absolute physical barricade. I demanded to see my daughter immediately. Blake crossed his arms over his chest and flatly refused my entry. He stated that Danielle was currently indisposed and unavailable for unannounced visitors. He commanded me to leave the premises before he called building security to have me forcibly removed. I told him I would not leave without speaking to my daughter face to face. I demanded he step aside. Blake smirked and leaned heavily against the door jamb. He informed me that he was the head of this household now. He declared himself the absolute gatekeeper of Danielle's time, energy, and communication. He told me my aggressive blue-collar tactics held absolutely no power in his home. He instructed me to go back to my cheap suburban house and wait for an invitation that would never arrive. A soft rustle of fabric broke the immediate tension. Danielle appeared in the hallway behind Blake. She wore an excessively expensive silk robe that dragged slightly on the hardwood floor. She looked entirely exhausted. Her eyes were deeply red and swollen from crying, yet she stood rigidly upright. She positioned herself firmly behind her fiancé's shoulder, using him as a physical shield against me. I looked directly at the daughter I raised from birth. I bypassed Blake's arrogant blockade and spoke straight to her. I bluntly informed her that the man standing in front of her did not just cancel a wedding venue. I stated clearly that Blake manipulated her signature to steal $3 million from her private trust fund. I told her the money did not go towards securing a future together. I revealed that Blake routed every single cent directly into a corporate shell company registered exclusively under Patricia's name. Danielle physically flinched at the exact monetary figure. Her breath hitched in her throat, but she quickly recovered her hardened posture. She wiped her eyes and stepped slightly forward, remaining safely behind Blake's outstretched arm. She refused to acknowledge the brutal reality of the theft. She stared at my worn coat and vehemently defended the man actively ruining her. She claimed the massive withdrawal was not a theft, but a highly sophisticated commercial investment. She recited Blake's corporate jargon with terrifying rehearsed precision. She stated that transferring the funds to Patricia's holding company was a strategic tax maneuver designed to shield their new assets. She told me I simply did not understand high-level wealth management. She accused me of holding a toxic, ignorant poverty mindset. She claimed my decades of manual labor trapped me in a mentality of fear and suspicion. She loudly declared that successful people leverage their capital to build empires while uneducated men like me hoard pennies under floorboards. Hearing my own daughter parrot the vicious, elitist poison of her fiancé shattered my expectations of an easy rescue. Blake had completely reprogrammed her reality. She was utterly convinced my protective instincts were signs of intellectual inferiority. She viewed her own financial slaughter as a brilliant business acquisition. Blake let out a sharp, victorious laugh. He reached back and wrapped his arm possessively around Danielle's waist. He pulled her flush against his side, displaying his absolute ownership over her mind and her money. He looked down at my scuffed leather boots. He mocked the mud caked around the soles. He told Danielle it was pathetic watching an old, irrelevant man attempt to comprehend the movements of the financial elite. He squeezed her waist and praised her for finally outgrowing my suffocating low-class influence. Danielle rested her head against his tailored shoulder, seeking comfort from the exact source of her destruction. The sound of sharp heels clicking against the hardwood floor interrupted the standoff. Patricia stepped out of the sprawling modern kitchen. She wore a pristine designer pantsuit and a cold, predatory smile. She did not look like a woman visiting her son. She looked like a general surveying a conquered territory. She held a crisp, white envelope in her manicured hand. She marched directly toward the front door, her heels striking the ground with military precision. She bypassed Danielle completely and stepped right up to the threshold. She held the envelope out toward me like a weapon. She informed me that the time for emotional family disputes was officially over. She stated she was entirely exhausted by my persistent, annoying interruptions into their refined lives. She proudly declared she was escalating this pathetic confrontation into a formalized legal war. She thrust the heavy paper toward my chest, demanding my absolute compliance. The battle lines were no longer drawn in a restaurant or a bank. They were being dictated right at the front door of my daughter's gilded cage. Patricia thrusts the crisp white envelope directly at my chest. I keep my hands firmly planted at my sides. I refuse to validate her theatrical aggression or play the role of her subordinate. The stiff paper strikes my heavy coat and flutters down to the polished hardwood floor. Patricia glares at the fallen document, deeply insulted by my absolute lack of compliance. She expects me to scramble for it. I stand perfectly still and look her dead in the eye. She loudly announces that the envelope contains a formal, legally binding cease and desist order. She boasts that her elite corporate litigators drafted it the very second Blake informed her I was investigating the trust fund breach at the bank. She proudly lists the terms of her newly constructed legal barricade. I am officially forbidden from contacting my own daughter in any capacity. I am barred from stepping within 500 feet of Danielle's luxury residence, Blake's failing brokerage firm, and the Royal Country Club wedding venue. Patricia threatens me with immediate severe police action if I violate a single parameter. She vows to file for a permanent restraining order to ensure I am locked out of their lives forever. She promises to drag me through a humiliating criminal court process. She claims she will ensure a judge brands me as a dangerous, unhinged stalker, obsessed with destroying his daughter's upward social mobility. She crosses her arms and steps beside her son, solidifying their united predatory front. She declares that my mere existence is a toxic liability to their pristine high society reputation. She insists that blue-collar people like me only understand boundaries when forced into submission by law enforcement. I look down at the white envelope resting on the expensive floorboards. I do not bend down to retrieve it. Patricia expects me to cower at the threat of police intervention. She assumes a man who spent his life in the working class possesses an inherent fear of expensive lawyers. She severely misjudges my tolerance for idle threats. I remind Patricia that a cease and desist is merely a warning letter generated by a hired firm. I inform her that it holds absolutely no judicial power without a signed court mandate. Her expensive legal stationery does not intimidate a man who built a vast empire from nothing. Patricia's face flushes bright red with indignation at my calm, unwavering defiance. She demands absolute respect for her authority. I tell her respect is earned through undeniable integrity, not purchased with $3 million of stolen trust fund capital. Blake immediately intervenes to protect his mother's bruised ego. He pulls Danielle closer, pressing her back firmly against his tailored suit. He leans down and places a highly performative, lingering kiss on the top of her head. He looks over Danielle's shoulder and locks eyes with me, a vicious, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He commands Danielle to tell me to leave. He orders her to verbally sever our relationship right here in the hallway. He uses a soft, deeply manipulative tone, treating her like a fragile asset he must protect from a hostile invading force. Danielle remains completely rigid against his chest. She refuses to look at my face. She stares intently at the dropped envelope on the floorboards. Her voice trembles as she begs me to go away. She asks me to stop ruining her life and sabotaging her future. She pleads with me to return to my quiet suburban house and leave her new family alone. Hearing my daughter label the architects of her financial ruin as her true family extinguishes my final hope for an immediate peaceful rescue. I realize I cannot save her through logical debate. I cannot break Blake's psychological grip while he holds the illusion of absolute power and wealth. I must dismantle the very foundation of his power to break the spell he cast over her. Arguing with a brainwashed hostage only strengthens the captor's control. I look away from my daughter. I direct my absolute focus entirely onto Blake. The smug satisfaction on his face fuels a chilling, calculated resolve inside my chest. I tell Blake I am leaving the penthouse. I step backward toward the elevator bank. I promise him with terrifying conviction that the financial ground he is standing on is a fragile illusion. I vow that the earth will completely collapse beneath his expensive shoes. I promise him the impending fall will destroy his brokerage firm, his pristine reputation, and his personal freedom. Blake laughs aloud. He dismisses my promise as the pathetic, empty parting words of a defeated, impoverished old man. He reaches out and slams the heavy oak door directly in my face. The deadbolt clicks shut with a heavy metallic finality. The hallway falls dead silent. I stand alone in front of the locked penthouse door. I do not waste a single second wallowing in grief or self-pity. I turn around and press the call button. I ride the elevator down to the loading zone in total silence. I walk briskly to my battered sedan and slide into the driver's seat. I slam the car door and lock it. I do not drive back to my quiet house in the suburbs. I pull my cell phone from my jacket pocket. I bypass Jonathan and my retail banking contacts entirely. I dial the private, unlisted number of Matthew. Matthew is my most ruthless, high-tier corporate attorney. He specializes in hostile acquisitions, aggressive asset liquidations, and absolute corporate warfare. He operates exclusively in the shadows for my most sensitive logistics holding companies. Matthew answers on the second ring. I do not offer a polite greeting or explain the family drama. I issue an immediate, absolute directive. I order Matthew to prepare a massive, unmitigated capital transfer. I instruct him to liquidate the entirety of my silent logistics portfolios and convert them into aggressive liquid cash by tomorrow morning. Matthew pauses, stunned by the sheer magnitude of the sudden command. He warns me that liquidating those shadow assets simultaneously will generate unprecedented market waves. I tell him I want a tidal wave. I command him to aim our financial artillery directly at the absolute apex of the city's elite real estate food chain. I set my sights on the Vanguard Investment Group. I intend to unleash a brutal financial war that Blake cannot possibly survive. I start my engine and speed out of the parking structure, driving straight toward the financial district. I pulled my sedan into the subterranean parking garage of the tallest glass skyscraper in the financial district. The Vanguard Investment Group occupied the top 10 floors of the monolith. I bypassed the marble security desk in the main lobby. The guards recognized my face instantly and stepped aside. I stepped into the private executive elevator and scanned my biometric clearance. The polished steel doors sealed shut. The high-speed elevator launched me directly to the 50th floor. I stepped out onto the thick, noise-canceling carpet of the private executive suite. The panoramic windows offered an unobstructed view of the sprawling city and the industrial harbor I secretly controlled. The heavy mahogany doors to the chief executive office stood open. I walked straight inside. Maxwell, the absolute head of the Vanguard Investment Group, sat behind a massive slab of black granite. He wore a bespoke Italian suit. He commanded billions of dollars in international capital. The moment I crossed the threshold, Maxwell stood up immediately. He buttoned his jacket and offered a deep, respectful nod. Maxwell was one of the very few men on Earth who knew my true identity. He knew I was not a retired freight loader surviving on a meager pension. He personally managed the vast offshore capital I generated over 4 decades. He audited the shell companies I used to acquire bankrupt trucking fleets. He knew I silently owned the entire continental supply chain. I controlled the asphalt routes, the shipping depots, and the commercial freight lines that kept the city breathing. I built an empire in absolute shadows. Maxwell respected the immense power of my anonymity. He gestured toward the expensive leather chair opposite his desk. I did not sit down. I walked directly to the floor-to-ceiling window and stared down at the waterfront property stretching along the coastline. The sprawling footprint of the Harbor View district gleamed under the morning sun. I kept my hands buried deep inside my coat pockets. I observed the frantic movement of construction crews and luxury vehicles far below. Blake considered that territory his newly conquered kingdom. He believed his sophisticated corporate robbery granted him permanent dominion over the waterfront. He relied heavily on the presumption that my wealth was finite and easily isolated. I looked back at Maxwell. He held a secure tablet preparing to brief me on the latest market fluctuations affecting my logistics portfolio. I raised my hand to stop him before he could speak. I did not come to Vanguard to discuss quarterly dividends. I came to deploy financial artillery. Maxwell placed his tablet face down on the granite desk. He offered a polished, professional smile. He formally congratulated me on the massive real estate acquisition executed by my future son-in-law. Maxwell stated that the entire financial district was buzzing about Blake securing the commercial lease for the Harbor View district. He praised the bold market move, assuming I secretly backed the venture to establish my daughter's new family in the high society echelon. He called Blake a visionary broker for locking down the most lucrative municipal development project of the decade. I stepped away from the window and placed my calloused hands flat on Maxwell's desk. I looked directly into his eyes and shattered his assumption. I informed him that Blake was not a visionary. He was a desperate bankrupt thief. I revealed that Blake utilized predatory manipulation to bypass my trust fund security protocols. He stole $3 million directly from my daughter's inheritance. He transferred the stolen capital into a corporate shell company controlled entirely by his elitist mother. He used my daughter as a financial shield to cover his toxic corporate debts. Maxwell's smile vanished instantly. The professional warmth drained from his face, replaced by the sharp, calculating focus of a financial predator. He realized he was not congratulating a proud father. He was speaking to a man preparing for absolute war. I clarified the exact nature of Blake's highly publicized acquisition. I explained that Blake only purchased a secondary commercial operating lease from the municipal council. He bought the temporary right to build and operate businesses on the waterfront. He did not purchase the actual dirt. The city council still held the foundational property rights. Blake was constructing his fragile glass castle on land he did not legally own. I declared my immediate unyielding intention. I ordered Maxwell to bypass the municipal bureaucracy entirely. I commanded him to contact the city council directly. I stated I wanted to purchase the underlying land deeds for the entire Harbor View district. I wanted absolute, undisputed ownership of the soil directly beneath Blake's new empire. I told Maxwell I refused to be a passive victim in a corporate robbery. I intended to legally encircle Blake's entire operation. I wanted to hold the foundational title to every square inch of his fraudulent development. I wanted the supreme authority to dictate the ground rules of his existence. Maxwell stared at me, processing the sheer magnitude of the aggressive maneuver. Maxwell leaned back in his leather chair. He folded his hands together, his mind rapidly calculating the catastrophic financial logistics. He warned me that the city council fiercely protected the Harbor View territory. He stated that the municipal government would require a massive, ungodly sum of liquid cash to privatize that specific stretch of foundational land. The purchase would bypass all standard zoning auctions. It required an overwhelming capital injection to force the immediate sale. He cautioned that securing the master deeds would severely deplete my available cash reserves. I did not blink. I authorized the complete, unmitigated liquidation of my shadow assets. I ordered Maxwell to sell off my silent partnerships in the regional shipping depots. I instructed him to dissolve my offshore holding accounts and convert the entire logistical portfolio into aggressive liquid capital by dawn. Maxwell warned that dumping those assets simultaneously would trigger massive federal tax penalties and generate unprecedented market shockwaves. He warned that liquidating my life's work for a single real estate acquisition bordered on financial madness. I firmly reminded him that my wealth existed solely to protect Danielle. If the fortress failed to protect her, the fortress became a weapon to avenge her. I flatly told him the financial penalties were entirely irrelevant. I did not care about the temporary loss of capital. I cared only about the permanent destruction of the man who stole my daughter's future. I demanded absolute compliance. I told him to draft the purchase agreements and deploy his most vicious negotiators to the city council. I commanded Maxwell to execute the liquidation immediately. I gave him a non-negotiable deadline. I ordered him to secure the heavy gold-stamped master deeds by tomorrow evening. I moved to become Blake's absolute, undeniable landlord. I intended to hold his professional survival completely in my calloused hands. The dirt would belong to my private holding company before the sun set the following day. Maxwell recognized the lethal finality in my voice. He reached for his secure phone to initiate the massive capital transfer. The trap was officially set. I turned and walked out of the executive suite without waiting for his confirmation. I left Vanguard to prepare for the final execution. 24 hours passed in agonizing, deliberate silence. I sat rigidly inside the heavily fortified conference room of my corporate attorney. Matthew paced across the length of the Persian rug. He was a ruthless legal shark dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit. He specialized in finding the fatal flaws in seemingly impenetrable corporate contracts. We spread the entire Harborview District municipal lease across the massive glass table. Blake believed this exact document was his impenetrable shield. He thought the city council's official seal granted him absolute immunity from my interference. He assumed his high society lawyers drafted a flawless agreement. He was entirely wrong. Matthew dragged his finger down the thick columns of dense legal jargon. He hunted for the structural weakness in Blake's armor. He stopped abruptly near the bottom of the 4th page. He tapped the glass table with a heavy gold pen. He instructed me to read a highly specific, deeply buried clause. I leaned forward and scrutinized the text. It was Section 4 of the Municipal Commercial Code. The law dictated the precise relationship between a leaseholder and a foundational landowner. The clause stated that any transfer of the underlying land deed immediately triggers a mandatory probation period. The new absolute owner possesses the legal right to renegotiate the foundational terms of the ground rent within 30 days of the acquisition. The trap was laid bare in plain English. Matthew explained the lethal mechanics of the municipal loophole. Blake purchased the right to operate commercial businesses on the surface. He did not purchase the soil. If I secure the master deeds, I become the absolute dictator of the ground rent. I can legally demand an astronomical increase in his monthly operational costs. Matthew looked me dead in the eye and delivered the killing blow. He stated that if the leaseholder fails to meet the newly established financial terms within 24 hours, the primary lease is instantly and irrevocably nullified. Blake would lose the property, his $3 million investment, and his entire corporate future in a single day. He built a financial guillotine for himself. I simply needed to pull the lever. The secure phone in the center of the glass table vibrated violently. The caller ID displayed Maxwell's private extension at the Vanguard Investment Group. I pressed the speaker button. The heavy silence of the conference room amplified Maxwell's voice. He did not offer polite small talk. He delivered the exact news I demanded to hear. He confirmed that the city council formally accepted my unprecedented massive cash offer. The municipal government eagerly bypassed their standard zoning auctions to secure my aggressive capital injection. They prioritized raw, immediate wealth over bureaucratic procedure. Maxwell stated that the federal wire transfers cleared the central banking system exactly 3 minutes ago. He completely liquidated my shadow logistics portfolios just as I commanded. The massive influx of capital flooded the city's treasury accounts. The transaction was absolute and legally binding. The heavy gold-stamped master land deeds were officially minted by the city clerk. I listened to the rhythmic hum of the high-speed secure printer in the corner of Matthew's office. A thick stack of watermarked legal paper slid into the metal receiving tray. Matthew walked over and retrieved the documents. He verified the digital signatures. He placed the crisp, warm pages directly into my calloused hands. I stared at the bold, undeniable black ink at the top of the page. The dirt beneath the Harbor View district officially belonged to my private holding company. I owned the waterfront. I owned the exact geographical coordinates where Blake planned to build his fraudulent empire. He stole $3 million from my daughter to purchase a temporary ticket to a party I now personally hosted. I ran my thumb over the raised gold seal of the municipality. The paper felt heavier than any cargo pallet I had ever lifted. It carried the weight of absolute destruction. My wealth was no longer hidden in offshore accounts or silent logistical partnerships. It was weaponized and aimed directly at the man trying to erase me. I instructed Maxwell to finalize the severe tax penalties and close the Vanguard channels. I severed the call immediately. The acquisition phase was completely finished. The battleground was officially mine. I folded the master deeds with meticulous precision. I placed the documents inside a reinforced leather briefcase. I snapped the heavy brass locks shut. The sharp metallic click echoed through the quiet conference room. I felt a profound sense of lethal calm wash over me. The frantic scramble to secure my daughter's future was over. I held the absolute power to dictate the terms of her survival. Matthew began gathering the discarded municipal lease copies from the glass table. We prepared to draft the formal eviction and rent hike notices. We planned to serve Blake the execution papers at the exact moment of his highest triumph. We wanted maximum public devastation. Suddenly, the red emergency light on Matthew's desk intercom flashed aggressively. The loud, piercing buzz shattered the silence of the room. Matthew hit the receiver button. The voice of the building's head security guard crackled through the speaker. The guard sounded highly alarmed and out of breath. He reported an escalating physical altercation in the main lobby. He stated that a young white male and an older white female were screaming at the concierge desk. They demanded immediate access to the private legal suites. The guard identified the hostile intruders as Blake and Patricia. My blood turned to ice. Blake must have triggered a secondary financial alert. He somehow discovered the massive coordinated capital withdrawal I initiated through Vanguard. He tracked the resulting financial tremors directly to my legal representation. He realized I was not retreating to the suburbs in defeat. The guard warned Matthew that the intruders violently bypassed the security turnstiles. Blake physically shoved a junior lobby attendant out of his way. They forced their way into the private executive elevator. They were currently riding up to our exact floor. Blake and Patricia were coming to physically stop me from executing any legal maneuvers. The legal warfare was about to turn into a brutal face-to-face collision. I tightened my grip on the handle of the briefcase. I stood my ground and waited for the elevator doors to open. The polished steel doors of the private elevator slid apart with a sharp, echoing chime. The heavy frosted glass doors of Matthew's boutique law firm were violently shoved inward. Blake stormed into the reception area without waiting for an invitation. His tailored suit jacket billowed behind him as he marched with the unchecked aggression of a man who believed he owned the entire city. Patricia followed closely on his heels, her face twisted in a mask of absolute elitist disgust. Two men flanked them. They wore identical pinstripe suits and carried thick leather briefcases. They were high-priced corporate litigators hired specifically to intimidate and destroy. They moved past the reception desk and pushed their way directly into our glass-walled conference room. Blake spotted me immediately. I stood perfectly still, my hand resting firmly on the handle of my secure briefcase containing the master land deeds. I did not flinch. I did not step back. Blake let out a loud, mocking laugh that bounced off the glass walls. He looked around the minimalist, unbranded conference room. Matthew operated exclusively in the shadows of the financial district. His firm did not display flashy billboards or boastful golden plaques. Blake surveyed the discreet environment and made a catastrophic miscalculation. He assumed I was standing in the office of a desperate low-rent attorney. He believed I had panicked after receiving the cease and desist order. He stated smugly that his financial monitors flagged a minor withdrawal from my personal checking account earlier that morning. He assumed I scraped together a few $1,000s from my meager pension to hire a cheap strip mall lawyer to fight his mother's legal barricade. He pointed his finger directly at my chest and demanded I stop wasting his valuable time. He declared that my pathetic attempt to secure legal representation was entirely useless against his Tier 1 corporate defense team. Blake stepped up to the glass table and ordered me to sit down. He announced he was putting a permanent end to my embarrassing rebellion. He demanded I sign a new comprehensive contract completely surrendering my remaining rights to Danielle's future estate. He wanted my legal erasure documented and finalized before he returned to his fraudulent commercial development project. The two corporate lawyers stepped forward in unison. They slammed a thick stack of legal documents onto the center of the glass conference table. The heavy impact echoed loudly in the tense room. One of the lawyers pulled an expensive silver pen from his pocket and placed it deliberately on top of the contract. Patricia stepped around her son and looked at me as if I were an infectious disease. She openly scoffed at my scuffed leather boots and my faded brown suit. She loudly proclaimed that my mere existence was an active, toxic threat to their new high society image. She stated that Danielle was officially ascending into the ranks of the city's true financial elite. She claimed my blue-collar demeanor, my calloused hands, and my stubborn poverty mindset were dangerous anchors dragging my daughter down. Patricia demanded absolute, unquestioning submission. She instructed me to read the top page of the contract. The document legally mandated that I sign away my fundamental right to ever contact Danielle again in any capacity. It barred me from phone calls, emails, physical proximity, and any future claim to her eventual offspring. Patricia reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out a pristine branded checkbook. She quickly scribbled a figure, tore the check from the binding, and slid it across the glass table toward me. The paper stopped right next to the silver pen. It was a cashier's check made out to my name for exactly $10,000. Patricia looked at me with a sickeningly sweet, condescending smile. She called it a generous relocation severance. She offered me a pathetic $10,000 payout to pack my bags, abandon my home, and disappear to a different state entirely. She demanded I take the bribe and vanish to Florida or Texas, far away from the polished corporate circles where she and Blake intended to parade my daughter. They stole $3 million of Danielle's inheritance to buy a temporary municipal lease, and they believed $10,000 was the exact price of my fatherhood. They expected me to grab the check like a starving beggar and run away in shame. They stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting for me to break under the overwhelming weight of their combined legal and financial pressure. I remained completely silent. I slowly pulled out my wooden chair and took a seat at the glass table. I did not look at the aggressive corporate lawyers standing over me. I kept my gaze locked entirely on Patricia. I reached out and picked up the cheap payout check. I held it between my scarred fingers, examining the insulting numbers printed across the bank watermark. I did not show a single ounce of anger or frustration. My absolute lack of emotion deeply unsettled Blake, but Patricia mistook my silence for the crushing realization of defeat. She assumed I was finally accepting my place at the bottom of her social hierarchy. She leaned forward, resting her manicured hands on the glass table, and decided to deliver the final psychological death blow. She lowered her voice to a vicious, venomous whisper. Patricia revealed that I could not call Danielle for help even if I wanted to. She proudly confessed that they had confiscated Danielle's cellular phone and completely isolated her from the outside world. Patricia claimed they convinced Danielle to undergo a mandatory digital detox to prepare her mind for the pressures of her upcoming high society wedding. In reality, they had locked her in the penthouse and severed her only remaining lifeline to her father. Patricia smiled coldly and tightened the psychological noose. She stated that if I refused to sign the surrender contract and take the $10,000 bribe, she would invoke her extensive connections within the city's medical board. She threatened to fabricate severe elder abuse charges against me. She promised to secure a fraudulent medical mandate declaring me legally incompetent and dangerously unhinged. Patricia swore she would have me forcibly removed from my home and locked indefinitely inside a state-run psychiatric facility. She vowed to strip away my freedom, my dignity, and my mind if I did not voluntarily erase myself from Danielle's life right now. The threat was absolute and terrifying. They intended to bury me alive. I stare at Patricia as the echo of her threat settles into the glass walls of the conference room. She believes the threat of a psychiatric facility will shatter my resolve. She assumes my greatest fear is losing my physical freedom. She does not realize my greatest fear was losing my daughter to a monster, and that fear has already materialized. I do not break eye contact with her. I place my hands flat on the edge of the glass table and push my chair backward. The wooden legs scrape loudly against the floor. I stand up to my full height. I do not display a single ounce of fear or hesitation. I reach across the table and pick up the $10,000 cashier's check. I hold it up to the overhead lights. I grasp the edges of the heavy bank paper. I tear the check perfectly in half. I stack the halves and tear them again. Patricia's jaw drops in absolute shock. I do not stop. I pick up the thick legal contract demanding my permanent surrender. I grip the bound spine of the document. I apply the brutal grip strength I developed hauling industrial steel crates for 2 decades. I rip the entire stack of legal paper straight down the middle. The sound of tearing paper fills the room like a series of sharp cracks. I methodically reduce their ironclad legal barricade into useless confetti. I open my hands and let the shredded pieces flutter down to the Persian rug. The white scraps cover Blake's polished leather shoes. Blake turns a violent shade of red. The veins in his neck bulge against his tailored collar. He realizes his money and his lawyers possess absolutely zero power over my actions. He loses his sophisticated corporate mask entirely. He lunges forward across the table, reaching out to physically grab my collar. Matthew steps smoothly into his path. My attorney plants his feet and shoves his forearm firmly against Blake's chest, halting his momentum instantly. Matthew warns Blake that any physical contact will result in immediate arrest for felony assault. I look at Blake struggling against my attorney. I command them to get out of my sight. Patricia completely loses her manufactured high society composure. She shrieks at the top of her lungs, her voice shrill and unhinged. She points a shaking finger at my face. She screams that I have sealed my own catastrophic fate. She promises that my stubborn arrogance will leave me rotting in absolute poverty. She swears she will personally ensure I die penniless in a squalid state-run facility. She insists that I threw away my only chance at a peaceful, funded exile. I remain entirely silent, letting her exhaust her frantic vocal assault. Her shrieks bounce off the glass walls, making her look entirely pathetic. The 2 corporate lawyers step backward, deeply uncomfortable with the chaotic breakdown of their elite clients. They discreetly pack their briefcases and retreat toward the reception area. Blake recovers his balance and pulls his mother back from the edge of the table. He adjusts his tie, attempting to salvage his bruised pride. He lets out a cold, hollow laugh. He stares at the shredded contract on the floor. He promises me that the legal paperwork was merely a courtesy. He vows to destroy my life permanently through sheer financial and social force. He swears he will manipulate Danielle's mind so thoroughly that she will actively despise my memory. He promises to ensure my daughter entirely forgets my name before she walks down the aisle. He declares that he has already won the war because he holds the ultimate prize. He turns his back on me. He grabs Patricia by the elbow and escorts her out of the conference room. They march through the reception area and exit the law firm. They slam the heavy frosted glass doors behind them with extreme force. The loud crash shakes the doorframe. They leave the office entirely convinced they have mentally broken an impoverished old man. They believe my silent refusal is the desperate, powerless reaction of a defeated father. I do not move until the elevator chime signals their departure from the floor. I turn away from the glass table and walk directly to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city street. I look down at the bustling avenue far below. A few moments later, I see Blake and Patricia emerge from the building's main entrance. They march aggressively toward a waiting black luxury SUV. They climb into the vehicle and speed away, heading back to their stolen penthouse. I watch their car disappear into the dense city traffic. I turn around and face Matthew. The tension in the conference room evaporates, replaced by a chilling, absolute focus. I ask Matthew for final confirmation regarding our defensive perimeter. Matthew nods sharply. He confirms the master land deeds are fully verified and permanently secured inside his biometric vault. He assures me the municipal acquisition is entirely sealed and shielded from public record until we choose to execute the reveal. The trap is now entirely set and armed. Blake is currently planning a massive grand opening gala for his fraudulent commercial district. He intends to invite the wealthiest families in the state to celebrate his fake empire. I order Matthew to prepare the formal execution notices. I command him to draft the official eviction mandates and the aggressive ground rent hikes. We will not strike today. We will wait for the exact moment of Blake's highest public triumph. We will wait until he stands on a stage in front of the entire city's elite. I will serve him the destruction of his life in front of the exact audience he desperately seeks to impress. I tell Matthew to lock the office. We have a gala to attend. 2 weeks passed in absolute, calculated silence. I retreated entirely into my modest suburban home. I locked the doors and fortified my physical and digital perimeter. I sat at my worn kitchen table and placed my cell phone squarely on the wooden surface. I watched the screen light up repeatedly with incoming messages. The texts did not come from an unknown or blocked number. They came directly from Danielle's personal phone. Blake had completely commandeered her device. He used her private number to send me continuous, viciously mocking taunts. He texted me high-resolution pictures of luxury wedding invitations featuring his mother's name printed as the exclusive host. He sent aggressive messages bragging that Danielle had already forgotten my existence. He demanded I cash the pathetic $10,000 payout check before he canceled it out of spite. I did not type a single reply. I did not block the number. I let his arrogant digital footprint grow, allowing him to build an undeniable time-stamped record of his own harassment. I turned my attention away from the glowing phone and pressed the power button on my television remote. I tuned the channel to the premier local financial news network. Blake's face dominated the high-definition screen. He sat in a plush studio chair wearing a bespoke navy suit. A prominent financial journalist was conducting a massive, highly publicized press tour interview. Blake beamed with manufactured, blinding confidence. He boasted endlessly about his visionary acquisition of the Harbor View commercial lease. He claimed he was single-handedly ushering in a new, unprecedented era of luxury commerce for the city. He spun a fabricated narrative about his brilliant corporate strategy, claiming he outsmarted billionaire developers to secure the prime waterfront property. He never once mentioned my daughter. He never acknowledged the stolen trust fund that financed his entire illusion. He looked directly into the camera lens and promised his wealthy investors massive guaranteed returns. He publicly cemented his entire professional reputation to a piece of paper that I possessed the absolute power to incinerate. He was painting a giant glowing target on his own back for the entire city to see. A heavy, urgent knock on my front door broke the quiet hum of the television broadcast. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Matthew stood on my front porch holding a thick, unmarked leather briefcase. I ushered my corporate attorney inside and locked the door behind him. We walked directly to the kitchen table. Matthew did not waste time with polite pleasantries. He unlatched his briefcase and pulled out a stack of fresh, highly sensitive financial audits. He spread the crisp papers across the table right next to my silent cell phone. He informed me that his shadow investigators had been tracking Blake's financial movements relentlessly over the past 14 days. The results were terrifying. Matthew revealed that Blake did not stop at stealing the $3 million from Danielle's trust fund. He utilized the newly acquired municipal commercial lease as hard collateral to secure a secondary massive influx of capital. Blake bypassed the heavily regulated federal banking system entirely. He went directly to aggressive, unregulated private equity lenders. These shadow firms operated outside standard financial oversight and employed brutal collection tactics. They approved a staggering $5 million loan based exclusively on the projected future value of the Harbor View development. Blake secured the dangerous capital and immediately began burning through it at an astonishing, reckless rate. Matthew slid a secondary ledger across the table. It detailed Blake's expenditures over the past 2 weeks. He was not using the loan to develop the waterfront. He was using the dangerous money to fund an absurdly expensive lifestyle. He purchased a fleet of exotic sports cars under his corporate banner. He booked luxury penthouses for his private meetings. He aggressively inflated the budget for the upcoming wedding, funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into Patricia's lavish event planning. He was desperately projecting the image of a billionaire tycoon to attract genuine institutional investors. He built a towering, fragile house of cards on a highly unstable foundation of stolen money and predatory debt. I picked up the private loan agreements and analyzed the brutal debt structure. The interest rates were astronomical. The default clauses embedded in the shadow contracts were absolutely lethal. These unregulated lenders did not offer grace periods or restructuring options. They demanded immediate aggressive asset forfeiture in the event of a contractual breach. I cross-referenced the predatory loans with the terms of my master land deed. The conflict chaining locked into a deadly, unavoidable trajectory. If I invoke Section 4 of the municipal law and massively spike the ground rent, Blake will instantly fail to meet the new payment. When he fails, I will legally nullify his commercial lease. The moment that lease is officially voided, the hard collateral securing his $5 million shadow loan instantly vaporizes. The private lenders will immediately call in the massive debt. Blake no longer possesses the liquid capital to pay them back. He will trigger an immediate, catastrophic financial default. The private equity firm will ruthlessly dismantle his brokerage and seize every remaining asset he holds. Furthermore, using a voided municipal lease to secure unregulated capital constitutes severe federal wire fraud. He will not merely face standard bankruptcy proceedings. He will face immediate federal criminal charges and decades in a high-security penitentiary. The stakes for Blake had officially escalated from social embarrassment to absolute life-or-death destruction. He placed his entire freedom into a guillotine and handed me the release rope. I placed the documents back onto the wooden table and looked directly at Matthew. The grand opening gala for the Harbor View Pavilion was scheduled for tomorrow night. I instructed Matthew to finalize the eviction papers and print the ground rent hike notifications on premium legal stock. I buttoned my coat and stared at the television screen where Blake continued to smile for the cameras. The waiting game was officially over. Friday evening descended on the city with a biting chill. The Harbor View Grand Pavilion glowed like a beacon of unearned arrogance against the dark waterfront. Searchlights pierced the night sky, sweeping back and forth to announce the birth of a fraudulent empire. Blake spared absolutely no expense for his grand opening gala. He utilized the dangerous $5 million he secured from unregulated shadow lenders to construct a masterpiece of corporate deception. He hung massive banners displaying his brokerage logo across the towering glass facade. A fleet of news vans and financial reporters crowded the perimeter. They were eager to broadcast the rise of the city's newest real estate tycoon. Inside the massive glass structure, the atmosphere was electric with manufactured triumph. The mayor, Tier 1 institutional investors, and the wealthiest aristocratic families in the state mingled under imported crystal chandeliers. Waiters carried silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and caviar. Blake orchestrated this exact moment to cement his untouchable status. He positioned himself at the absolute epicenter of high society. He stood on the grand stage, shaking hands with politicians and accepting praise for a commercial district he technically hijacked. Patricia operated the room like a predatory queen. She boasted to the elite wives about her son's unprecedented financial genius. She proudly displayed Danielle as a silent, compliant trophy. They forced my daughter into a restrictive, highly uncomfortable designer gown. They paraded her around the ballroom to project the illusion of a unified, powerful dynasty. They effectively silenced the true source of their capital. Blake believed he had perfectly executed his extraction scheme. He assumed the heavy iron doors of his new fortress were permanently locked against my existence. He believed the brutal legal barricade he constructed left me rotting in my suburban kitchen. He thought the $5 million in predatory loans guaranteed his permanent ascension into the billionaire class. He threw the party of the decade to celebrate his flawless robbery. He truly believed the municipal commercial lease he held was an impenetrable shield. He was utterly unaware that the ground beneath his expensive Italian shoes no longer belonged to the municipal government. The entire Grand Pavilion rested on dirt I legally owned. I did not require a VIP invitation to attend a celebration hosted on my own private property. I steered my battered sedan down the immaculate, freshly paved boulevard leading to the pavilion. The rusted muffler growled loudly against the quiet hum of electric luxury vehicles lining the avenue. I bypassed the sprawling line of chauffeurs and VIP drop-off zones. I drove directly into the exclusive front plaza. A designated parking area displayed a row of pristine million-dollar exotic sports cars. I did not search for the overflow lot. I aimed my heavy steel bumper directly toward the VIP section. I wedged my rusted sedan perfectly between a gleaming red Ferrari and a custom silver Bentley. The harsh screech of my brakes echoed across the manicured courtyard. Two valet attendants rushed forward, waving their illuminated batons frantically. They shouted that the zone was strictly reserved for platinum investors. I killed the engine and ignored them completely. I opened my car door and stepped out into the freezing night air. I locked the driver's side door with a loud, mechanical clunk. The valets threatened to tow my vehicle. I dropped my keys back into my pocket and kept walking. I did not rent a tuxedo for the occasion. I deliberately wore the exact same stiff brown suit I wore to the restaurant 2 weeks ago. I wore the faded fabric Patricia had mocked with such venomous elitist disgust. She judged my worth by the fraying threads of my collar. I intended to destroy her son's life wearing the precise uniform of a working-class father. I adjusted my lapels and patted my breast pocket. The heavy gold-stamped master land deed rested safely against my chest. It was the ultimate weapon forged from 40 years of invisible labor. I left the valet attendants shouting at my empty car. I turned my gaze toward the towering glass facade of the pavilion. The brilliant lights spilled out onto the red carpet, illuminating the path to Blake's destruction. I walked forward with a steady, measured pace. My scuffed leather boots struck the pavement with absolute certainty. I did not walk like an old man defeated by corporate lawyers. I marched with the lethal focus of an executioner walking to the scaffold. I was completely uninvited to the gala, yet I held the power to shut the entire building down with a single sentence. I approached the red carpet. The grand glass doors of the pavilion loomed ahead, framed by towering floral arrangements and thick velvet ropes. A formidable wall of private security guarded the entrance. Blake hired a heavily armed elite tactical firm to ensure zero unwanted elements breached his perfect society event. 6 muscular men in tailored dark suits and communication earpieces scanned the approaching guests. They checked gold-embossed invitations and matched faces to a rigorous digital registry. I stepped onto the edge of the plush red carpet. The bright flashes of paparazzi cameras momentarily blinded my peripheral vision. The lead security guard spotted me instantly. His eyes dropped to my scuffed boots and traveled up the faded fabric of my brown suit. He did not see a wealthy investor. He saw a blue-collar vagrant attempting to infiltrate a billionaire's sanctuary. He tapped his earpiece and signaled his team. The guards moved with aggressive, synchronized precision. They abandoned their posts at the glass doors and marched directly down the red carpet toward me. They formed a solid human barricade, physically blocking the path to the entrance. The lead guard stepped ahead of his men. He was a massive man with a thick neck and a hostile glare. He puffed out his chest, attempting to intimidate me with his sheer physical mass. He planted his heavy boots squarely in front of me, forcing me to halt my advance. He raised his hand and shoved his palm aggressively toward the center of my chest. He demanded I step back off the carpet immediately. He ordered me to produce a platinum VIP invitation or face immediate physical removal. He warned me that Blake specifically ordered the perimeter sterilized of all low-class interruptions. He threatened to have me arrested for trespassing on an exclusive corporate leasehold. He sneered, stating that vagrants were strictly prohibited from ruining the aesthetics of the grand opening. The crowd of wealthy guests behind the velvet ropes stopped and stared, whispering in disgust at the disruption. I stood perfectly still under the blinding lights. I did not retreat a single inch. I looked the aggressive guard directly in the eyes. I prepared to deploy the financial guillotine hidden inside my pocket. The immense physical force of the lead guard's shove barely moves my stance. I plant my heavy leather boots firmly onto the plush fibers of the red carpet. I do not retreat a single inch. The guard sneers, revealing a row of perfectly white teeth. He looks me up and down with absolute contempt. He loudly mocks the faded fabric of my brown suit, calling it a thrift store rag unfit for a public sidewalk. He asks if I wandered away from a local homeless shelter looking for a free meal. He threatens to signal the police cruisers parked at the curb to haul me away for vagrancy. The wealthy guests standing behind the velvet ropes laugh and point their champagne flutes in my direction. They view me as a momentary amusing disruption to their elite gathering. They stare at me with the exact same elitist disgust Patricia displayed at the dinner table. The lead guard demands a platinum VIP invitation for the 4th time. He cracks his knuckles, sending a clear, aggressive signal to his squad. The other 5 muscular men close in tightly, preparing to grab my arms and physically hurl me onto the concrete. I do not flinch. I do not raise my voice to match his hostile shouting. I know the exact devastating power I hold inside my coat. Arguing with a hired corporate mercenary is a complete waste of breath. I stare directly into his aggressive eyes. I tell him to remove his hand from my chest immediately. My voice carries a cold, lethal authority that gives him pause. He hesitates for a fraction of a second, surprised by my absolute lack of fear. I reach slowly and deliberately into the inner breast pocket of my suit jacket. The guard tenses, ready to tackle me to the ground. He assumes I am reaching for a weapon. He is entirely correct, but it is not a weapon he can stop with physical force. I pull out the thick, heavily stamped legal document. The premium watermarked paper feels heavy in the freezing wind. I do not unfold it yet. I hold it up just high enough for the harsh red carpet spotlights to catch the shimmering gold municipal seal stamped on the front cover. I thrust the heavy legal document directly against the lead guard's chest. He instinctively grabs the thick stack of premium paper before it falls. He looks at the documents with immense confusion. He clearly expects to see a forged event ticket or a pathetic handwritten plea for entry. He gets the master land deed for the entire Harbor View district. I issue a firm, unbreakable command. I order him to read the top line of the first page. I instruct him to read the name of the absolute property owner out loud. The guard frowns in deep annoyance. He unfolds the heavy document, fully intending to laugh at my fake credentials and toss the paper into the street. His eyes scan the bold black ink printed across the header. The arrogant smirk vanishes from his face in less than 2 seconds. All the blood completely drains from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly, pale white. His hostile posture collapses entirely. He recognizes the official raised municipal seal of the city council. He reads my name clearly printed as the undisputed sole owner of the private holding company holding the deed. He reads the exact geographical coordinates of the property. He realizes he is physically assaulting the absolute landlord of the entire Grand Pavilion. He swallows hard. His large hands tremble violently, shaking the crisp pages. He looks from the master deed back to my scarred face. He realizes Blake does not own the ground he is standing on. The guard turns frantically toward his advancing squad. The other muscular men are still moving forward, preparing to throw me into the street. The lead guard snaps a harsh, desperate command. He orders his men to stand down immediately. He physically shoves his own subordinates out of the way. He forces them to step off the red carpet and break their human barricade. The junior guards look completely bewildered. They hesitate, questioning the sudden reversal of orders. The lead guard barks the command a second time, his voice cracking with sheer, unfiltered panic. He tells them to clear the path right now. The defensive wall crumbles entirely. The lead guard quickly folds the master land deed. He hands the thick document back to me with shaking hands. He does not say a single word. He steps backward, lowering his head in a posture of absolute submission. He reaches out and grabs the polished brass handle of the heavy glass doors. He pulls the massive doors wide open, bowing respectfully as he clears the threshold. He grants me total, unrestricted access to the venue. I slide the legal document back into my breast pocket. I adjust my collar and walk past the terrified security team. I step through the grand entrance. The freezing night air instantly vanishes, replaced by the stifling warmth of centralized heating and expensive floral arrangements. My scuffed leather boots step onto the pristine, polished marble floor of the grand ballroom. The sheer scale of Blake's fraudulent empire unfolds before me. A towering ice sculpture dominates the center of the massive room. A string quartet plays classical music in the corner. Hundreds of corporate elites and politicians mill around, clinking crystal flutes filled with vintage champagne. They laugh and celebrate a commercial acquisition built entirely on my daughter's stolen trust fund capital. The sheer arrogance of the room is suffocating. They are completely unaware that their esteemed host is a bankrupt thief. They do not know the foundation of the building they stand inside belongs to the man wearing the cheap brown suit. They are celebrating on the deck of a sinking ship. I scan the massive crowded room. I spot the raised stage at the far end of the ballroom. I locate my target. The executioner has officially arrived. The heavy glass doors swing shut behind me, sealing out the freezing wind. The grand ballroom of the Harbor View Pavilion is a towering monument to excessive, unearned wealth. Crystal chandeliers suspend from the vaulted ceilings, casting a brilliant, blinding light over the financial elite of the city. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos weave through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with caviar and vintage champagne. I step directly onto the center aisle. My scuffed leather boots strike the polished marble floor with a heavy rhythmic thud. The wealthy guests notice the harsh sound. They turn their heads. The polite conversations die out in a rapid, cascading wave of confusion and sheer disgust. They look at the faded fabric of my brown suit. They see a blue-collar worker invading their pristine billionaire sanctuary. The sea of tailored tuxedos and silk gowns parts for me instinctively. They pull their expensive clothing away from my path as if my poverty is a contagious disease. I do not look at them. I keep my eyes locked entirely on the raised stage at the far end of the ballroom. Blake stands behind a thick crystal podium. He wears a custom white tuxedo jacket. He holds a microphone and delivers a boastful, triumphant speech to his investors. He brags about his visionary leadership and his unparalleled corporate acquisition. He paints himself as the sole architect of the waterfront empire. Danielle stands 2 steps behind him. She does not look like a proud fiancée. She looks entirely miserable. Patricia forced her into a highly restrictive, heavily corseted designer gown that suffocates her natural grace. Danielle stares blankly at the floorboards, completely isolated in a room filled with hundreds of people. Patricia stands to the right of the podium. She wears a glittering silver evening gown. She beams with absolute predatory pride. She watches her son secure his place at the absolute apex of high society. She believes she successfully erased my existence to build this exact moment. I march steadily down the aisle, closing the distance between the shadows of the loading docks and the bright lights of their stolen stage. I reach the edge of the VIP seating area just below the stage. The murmurs of the crowd grow into an audible, vibrating hum of outrage. Patricia shifts her gaze from the audience to the source of the disruption. Her eyes lock onto my face. The blindingly proud smile drops from her lips instantly. Her features twist into an ugly, unrecognizable snarl of pure hatred and panic. She realizes the impoverished old man she mocked and legally threatened has completely bypassed her elite perimeter. She built a fortress of stolen money and fake prestige, and I just walked right through her front door. She snatches a secondary microphone from the stand beside her. She does not care about maintaining her refined social grace. She shrieks at the absolute top of her lungs. Her shrill voice echoes violently through the massive sound system, deafening the front row of investors. She points a trembling manicured finger directly at my chest. She commands the interior security teams to forcefully tackle the trespasser. She screams that I am a dangerous, unhinged stalker who broke into a private corporate function. She demands they remove me from the building immediately and violently. Blake stops his speech mid-sentence. He looks down from the podium and sees me standing calmly in the center aisle. The color drains slightly from his face, but his arrogant anger quickly masks his confusion. Two massive interior security guards stationed near the stage stairs draw their heavy batons. They do not hesitate. They rush forward with aggressive tactical precision. They prepare to physically tackle me to the marble floor and drag me out into the freezing night. The wealthy guests gasp and step further back, creating a wide circle for the impending violence. Patricia continues to scream into the microphone, demanding they break my jaw if necessary. She wants me humiliated and beaten in front of the exact society she desperately craves. I stand perfectly still at the base of the stage. I do not raise my fists to fight the incoming guards. I brace my boots against the marble floor. I prepare to detonate the financial bomb I carry in my breast pocket. The two guards close the distance in seconds. I raise my right hand high into the air in a sharp, authoritative gesture of absolute command. I do not shout, but my voice booms with the heavy, undeniable authority of a man who spent 40 years commanding brutal freight yards. I declare loudly and clearly that a man cannot legally trespass on his own private property. The sheer conviction in my voice causes the guards to freeze in their tracks. They hesitate, lowering their batons and looking up at Blake for confirmation. The entire ballroom falls into a dead, breathless silence. The elite investors stare at me, stunned by the absolute audacity of my claim. Blake leans into his crystal podium. He lets out a loud, mocking laugh that reverberates through the towering speakers. He attempts to regain control of his audience by turning my declaration into a pathetic joke. He tells the crowd to ignore the delusional ramblings of an impoverished old man suffering from a severe mental breakdown. He claims I am a confused, estranged relative having a very public, very embarrassing medical episode. He orders the guards to proceed with the violent removal. He assures his investors that the nuisance will be handled swiftly and quietly. He looks down at me with supreme, unshakable arrogance. I do not break eye contact with the thief who stole my daughter's future. I bypass the frozen security guards. I place my hand on the brass railing of the stage stairs. I step confidently onto the first step. I walk up the stairs and step directly onto the raised platform. I invade his immaculate stage wearing my scuffed leather boots and my faded brown suit. I stand face to face with Blake under the blinding spotlights. The time for silent endurance is completely over. I reach inside my coat pocket to deliver the execution. I stand directly in front of Blake. The bright stage spotlights beat down on our faces. The massive crystal podium separates my faded brown suit from his immaculate white tuxedo. He tries to maintain his billionaire persona in front of the watching elite. He grips the edges of the glass podium and leans forward. He whispers a vicious threat under his breath, promising to have me beaten in the parking lot. I do not react to his pathetic physical posturing. I reach inside my inner breast pocket. My calloused fingers grip the thick, premium watermarked paper. I pull the master land deed from my jacket. I lift it high enough for the news cameras in the back of the room to catch the reflection of the heavy gold municipal seal. I bring the document down hard. I drop the thick stack of legal paper directly onto the center of his pristine glass podium. The heavy thud echoes through Blake's live microphone. I issue a singular absolute command. I order Blake to read the top line of the first page. I instruct him to read the name of the new absolute landowner out loud for his entire audience to hear. Blake scoffs loudly. He rolls his eyes and refuses to look down at the paperwork. He leans into the microphone and attempts to humiliate me further. He confidently declares to his wealthy investors that the old man is suffering a severe cognitive breakdown. He boasts that the municipal government owns the foundational dirt beneath the pavilion. He claims he holds an impenetrable 99-year commercial lease granted directly by the city council. He smirks and states that a washed-up freight loader cannot possibly possess a valid property deed for a billion-dollar commercial zone. He believes his corporate lawyers constructed a flawless legal fortress. He believes his status protects him from consequence. He assumes my lack of a designer wardrobe equates to a lack of financial literacy. I do not argue with his blind arrogance. I simply tap my index finger against the raised gold seal on the cover page. I command him a second time to read the ink. Blake sighs with heavy performative annoyance. He picks up the master land deed to appease me and mock my supposed forgery. He grips the crisp pages with his manicured fingers. He flips open the heavy cover sheet. His eyes scan the bold black text printed across the header. The smug, victorious smirk vanishes from his face in a fraction of a second. All the blood completely drains from his cheeks, leaving his skin the color of dirty chalk. His pupils dilate in sheer, unfiltered terror. He recognizes the official, undeniable watermark of the city's Supreme Financial Council. He reads the exact geographical coordinates of the Harbor View District. He reads my full legal name printed as the sole, undisputed owner of the private holding company holding the title. He realizes the city council bypassed the public auction and sold the literal ground beneath his feet. His hands begin to shake uncontrollably. The thick legal paper rustles loudly against the microphone. His knees buckle slightly under the crushing weight of the revelation. He drops the master deed as if the pages are engulfed in flames. The document lands back on the glass podium with a heavy slap. Blake staggers backward, moving away from the microphone. He stammers that the document is entirely impossible. He whispers frantically that a blue-collar worker could never generate the ungodly sum of liquid cash required to privatize a municipal waterfront. He struggles to draw breath. The reality of his catastrophic error suffocates him. He realizes he did not secure a legacy. He secured his own financial execution. He realizes my faded brown suit is a deliberate, highly calculated disguise. He suddenly understands that I did not spend 40 years loading cargo pallets. I spent 4 decades silently purchasing the entire continental logistics network. He grasps the terrifying reality that he picked a fight with an apex predator. He looks down at his expensive Italian leather shoes. He realizes he is standing on my private property. He stole my daughter's trust fund to build a fragile empire inside a steel cage I completely control. I do not wait for Blake to recover his breath. I step up to the crystal podium and pull the microphone directly toward my mouth. I turn my back to the trembling broker and face the massive, silent ballroom. Hundreds of elite investors, city politicians, and wealthy socialites stare at me in absolute shock. I project my voice across the cavernous space. I loudly inform the entire crowd that I purchased the dirt beneath their feet exactly 48 hours ago. I declare myself the absolute landlord of the Harbor View Grand Pavilion. A wave of panicked murmurs ripples through the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The investors in the front row begin to step backward. The wealthy elites realize they are attending an active crime scene. Patricia breaks the stunned silence. She lets out a feral, unhinged shriek. She lunges across the stage in her glittering silver dress. She shoves her own son aside and snatches the master deed from the glass podium. Her eyes dart violently across the legal text. She screams hysterically into the open air. She shouts that my document is a fraudulent fabrication. She cries out that she personally invested $3 million of pristine corporate capital into securing this commercial development. I turn my head and look down at her desperate, sweating face. I lean into the microphone so every single guest can hear my response clearly. I coldly remind Patricia that she did not invest a single dime of her own corporate capital. I state that she invested $3 million of my daughter's stolen inheritance. I announce that she and her son orchestrated a predatory financial heist disguised as a high society wedding upgrade. The entire room gasps as the facade shatters. The trap is officially sprung. The steel jaws close perfectly around their necks. I keep my hand resting firmly on the heavy master land deed. The entire ballroom hangs on my next breath. Patricia's hysterical shrieks die in her throat as she realizes the sheer magnitude of her error. I turn my body away from her and lock my gaze entirely onto Blake. He stands frozen behind the crystal podium. His pristine white tuxedo looks like a burial shroud. I lean forward and speak directly into the microphone. My voice booms through the towering speakers echoing across the cavernous pavilion. I instruct Blake to recall the precise legal architecture of his municipal agreement. I cite Section 4 of the Commercial Zoning Code verbatim. I remind him that any transfer of the underlying land deed automatically triggers a mandatory probation period. The law explicitly grants the new absolute owner the unilateral right to renegotiate the foundational terms of the ground rent within 30 days of the acquisition. I watch the remaining blood drain from his face. He knows exactly what that clause entails. He assumed the city council would never sell the dirt because the privatization fee was historically astronomical. He underestimated the depth of my shadow accounts. He never prepared a contingency for a hostile private landlord. I declare that I am executing my legal right now. I do not require a 30-day review period. I publicly announce my new foundational terms to the entire crowd of investors. I am tripling the ground rent for the entire Harborview district. I increase his operational overhead by 300% effective immediately. I state the new astronomical monthly premium out loud. The staggering financial figure reverberates through the silent ballroom. The elite investors gasp at the sheer brutality of the maneuver. I designed the new rent structure specifically to crush his cash flow. I engineered a financial burden that no legitimate bank would ever finance. I look at Blake and demand his immediate compliance. I ask him if his brokerage firm possesses the liquid capital to meet my newly established terms. Blake stumbles backward away from the glass podium. His polished leather shoes slip awkwardly against the polished stage floor. He grips the edge of a massive floral stand to keep from collapsing completely. He shakes his head in frantic, jerky movements. He leans toward the microphone and whispers a desperate, breathy confession. He admits he cannot afford the new operational costs. He states that the sudden rent increase will bankrupt his firm before sunrise. He begs me to reconsider the terms, pleading for a standard commercial negotiation in private. I do not offer a single inch of mercy. I capitalize on his public admission immediately. I lean back into the microphone and deliver the final execution. I cite the secondary penalty clause embedded within the Municipal Commercial Code. I announce that failure to meet the newly established financial terms within 24 hours allows the absolute landlord to trigger an immediate breach of contract. I do not wait 24 hours. He just confessed his inability to pay in front of the city's highest financial authorities. I publicly declare Blake in absolute irrevocable financial default. I state that I am legally terminating his 99-year commercial lease on the spot. I pronounce the Harborview Commercial Development Project officially dead. I tell the audience that Blake no longer holds the right to operate a single business on this waterfront. I look directly at Patricia. I inform her that the $3 million she stole from my daughter's trust fund just vanished entirely into the void of a voided contract. The capital evaporated to cover the municipal default penalties. The lease is now worthless paper. I turn my eyes back to Blake. I announce his immediate catastrophic bankruptcy to his peers. I declare that he does not own a real estate empire. He owns absolutely nothing. Patricia completely shatters. She drops the microphone and falls to her knees on the stage. She shrieks hysterically, her voice echoing wildly without the amplification. She scrambles toward the edge of the platform and reaches her manicured hands out to the wealthy investors in the front row. She begs the billionaires and corporate tycoons for emergency financial backing. She pleads for a bridge loan to cover the new ground rent and save their stolen project. She promises massive illegal returns to anyone willing to write a check. The elite investors do not reach for their wallets. They are ruthless, calculating pragmatists. They hear the desperation in her voice. I speak into the microphone one last time. I casually mention the additional $5 million Blake recently secured from unregulated predatory private equity lenders. I state that he used a now-voided municipal lease as hard collateral for shadow money. A shockwave of pure panic rips through the crowd. The investors instantly realize Blake is a radioactive fraud. He lost his only tangible asset. He owes millions to highly dangerous creditors. He faces imminent federal wire fraud charges. The wealthy elites turn their backs simultaneously. The collective movement looks like a synchronized military retreat. Crystal champagne flutes shatter on the marble floor as guests abandon their drinks. The string quartet abruptly stops playing, packing their instruments in terror. The socialites and politicians rush toward the coat checks and the valet stands. They trample over the velvet ropes in a desperate bid to distance themselves from the toxic fallout. The grand ballroom empties at terrifying speed. Waiters drop their silver trays, sensing the impending collapse. Blake stands paralyzed on the stage, watching his entire high society empire turn to ash in a matter of seconds. Danielle watches the last of the elite investors stampede through the grand glass doors. The massive ballroom, previously buzzing with billionaire tycoons and city politicians, now stands entirely desolate. Overturned champagne flutes leak vintage wine across the pristine marble floor. The sheer magnitude of the social abandonment hangs heavily in the freezing air. Danielle steps forward from the shadows of the crystal podium. The restrictive, heavily corseted designer gown Patricia forced her to wear no longer projects an image of high society royalty. It looks exactly like a glamorous straitjacket holding a prisoner. I stand silently and watch my daughter finally reclaim her own mind. She stares at the man she intended to marry. The immaculate illusion of Blake's supreme corporate power shatters completely into millions of jagged pieces. She sees him not as a wealthy protector, but as a desperate bankrupt predator. She marches directly toward him. Her expensive heels strike the stage with sharp, rhythmic cracks. She demands he look her in the eyes. She confronts him with the brutal reality of his deception. She methodically recounts the exact timeline of his manipulation out loud. She realizes he isolated her in that luxury penthouse specifically to sever her from my protective oversight. He confiscated her cellular phone under the guise of a pre-wedding digital detox to ensure she could never verify his financial claims with me or the bank. He fed her complex corporate jargon about strategic tax maneuvers and master leases solely to loot her generational wealth. He used her deep emotional trust as a skeleton key to unlock a $3 million vault. Danielle's voice grows louder and more authoritative with every single word. She tells Blake he never viewed her as an equal partner. He viewed her entirely as a highly lucrative financial shield. He needed her clean capital to absorb the catastrophic impact of his toxic, unregulated debts. He manipulated her into funding the very weapon that was supposed to destroy her father. The realization of her own exploitation ignites a fierce, undeniable rage within her. She recognizes that the man she loved is nothing more than an aggressive parasite dressed in a tailored white tuxedo. She refuses to be a casualty of his overwhelming arrogance. Blake crumbles under the sheer weight of her accurate accusations. His arrogant corporate mask dissolves into an expression of raw, unadulterated terror. His legs give out completely. He collapses onto his knees on the polished stage floor. The heavy impact echoes loudly in the empty pavilion. He looks up at Danielle with desperate, tear-filled eyes. He reaches out with trembling hands and grabs the heavy silk hem of her designer gown. He weeps openly, abandoning every single ounce of his manufactured high society dignity. He begs Danielle to save him from the impending federal wire fraud charges. He sobs about the ruthless shadow lenders who will violently dismantle his life by tomorrow morning. He knows unregulated creditors do not use the court system to collect their debts. They use physical force. He pleads with her to use her emotional leverage to force me into reversing the master deed transfer. He demands she convince me to reinstate the commercial lease and save his fraudulent empire. Patricia watches her son grovel on the floor, but she remains entirely paralyzed by shock, unable to intervene. Danielle does not reach down to comfort him. She does not shed a single tear. She stares down at the weeping man, clinging to her dress with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. She looks at his pathetic, trembling hands and connects the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. She states the truth out loud. She realizes he banned me from the wedding ceremony and initiated the aggressive cease and desist order for one highly specific reason. He needed to physically and legally remove the only man capable of auditing the trust fund before the stolen capital cleared Patricia's holding account. He weaponized classism and social anxiety merely to execute a flawless financial heist without interference. Danielle tells Blake he is the most pathetic coward she has ever encountered in her life. She forcefully yanks the fabric of her dress out of his desperate grip. She steps back, putting physical distance between herself and his toxic desperation. She realizes the working-class father she had recently felt ashamed of is the only person in the room with absolute integrity. My protective poverty mindset was actually the ultimate tactical armor. Danielle reaches around to the back of her neck. Her fingers find the intricate clasp of the heavy diamond necklace Patricia forced her to wear as a glittering symbol of their elite dynasty. She snaps the clasp open with a sharp, decisive pull. She pulls the heavy jewels away from her skin, shedding the physical chains of their manipulation. She reaches down to her left hand and grabs the massive platinum engagement ring. She twists the diamond off her finger without a single moment of hesitation. She holds the expensive jewelry in her closed fist for one heavy second. She opens her hand and drops the diamonds directly onto the hard stage floor. The heavy metal and precious stones strike the polished wood with a loud final clatter. The sound signals the absolute termination of Blake's control over her mind and her money. Danielle projects her voice across the empty ballroom. She announces loudly and decisively that the wedding is officially canceled. She declares she will rather die in absolute poverty than marry a parasitic fraud. She turns her back on Blake completely. She does not look at Patricia, who remains entirely speechless near the podium. Danielle walks purposefully across the stage. She marches directly toward me. She stops and stands firmly by my side. She links her arm through mine, physically and emotionally aligning herself with her true protector. Blake remains entirely alone on the floor. He hunches over the discarded diamonds, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands. His pristine white tuxedo is wrinkled and stained with sweat. His grandiose real estate empire has evaporated into thin air. He faces federal prison, violent creditors, and absolute social ruin. The elite dynasty he promised his mother has collapsed into a pile of worthless paper and broken promises. I look at the daughter I raised from birth. She holds her head high. She survived the brutal extraction scheme and emerged with her moral compass fully restored. We stand together as a united, unbreakable front. The toxic elements are completely neutralized. The financial slaughter is entirely finished. Blake drags his knees across the polished stage floor. He ignores the scattered diamonds resting mere inches from his hands. He crawls directly toward my scuffed leather boots. The pristine white fabric of his custom tuxedo pants stains with dark, ugly scuff marks. He reaches forward and wraps his trembling fingers around the hem of my faded brown suit jacket. He looks up at me with a face entirely drenched in sweat and terrified tears. He begs me for mercy. He sobs uncontrollably. His voice cracks under the crushing weight of his absolute financial ruin. He confesses the sheer terror awaiting him beyond the glass doors of the pavilion. He wails that the unregulated shadow lenders will not take him to civil court. They will violently dismantle his life to recoup their $5 million. He screams that the federal authorities will indict him for wire fraud by tomorrow morning. He pleads with me to reinstate the commercial lease just long enough for him to secure a bridge loan and flee the state. He promises to disappear completely from Danielle's life if I grant him this single financial pardon. I do not step back. I do not reach down to help him stand. I look down at the weeping, broken man who tried to erase my existence. I feel absolutely zero pity for him. I feel no compassion for a predator caught in his own trap. I state clearly that his current terror is the exact harvest of his own extreme greed. I remind him that he spent months carefully isolating my daughter and plotting the theft of her inheritance. He weaponized my love to build his fraudulent empire. I tell Blake that his apologies are entirely useless. I inform him that apologies do not rewrite history or reverse intentional cruelty. They only serve to acknowledge the catastrophic damage he actively chose to inflict. I pry his shaking fingers off my suit jacket. I force him to release his desperate grip on my clothing. I step over his outstretched arms and prepare to clear my building. I deliver my final absolute command. I look from Blake to Patricia. She stands frozen near the crystal podium. Her silver evening gown shimmers uselessly under the bright stage spotlights. I inform them both that their temporary occupancy of my property has officially expired. I grant them exactly 30 minutes to collect their personal belongings and vacate the Harborview Grand Pavilion. I state that if they remain inside my building 1 second past the deadline, I will personally contact the municipal police department. I will press formal charges for criminal trespassing on a private commercial leasehold. I promise to have them dragged out of the grand lobby in heavy steel handcuffs. Patricia finally shatters under the undeniable reality of her total destruction. Her manufactured high society composure evaporates instantly. She collapses onto the hard stage floor right next to her son. She weeps loudly, mourning the immediate permanent death of her elite social status. She realizes she will face the brutal mockery of the exact billionaire aristocrats she spent years trying to impress. Her name is now synonymous with absolute financial fraud and staggering incompetence. She clutches her face, wailing into her manicured hands. She realizes her greed cost her everything she valued. Blake remains entirely paralyzed on the floorboards. His vocal cords fail him completely. He stares blankly at the empty ballroom, his mind unable to process the sheer velocity of his downfall. The few remaining private security guards step forward from the shadows of the venue. They no longer answer to Blake. They recognize the man holding the master land deed is their true paying employer. The lead guard walks directly onto the stage. He does not offer Blake a helping hand. He grabs Blake firmly by the shoulder of his ruined white tuxedo. He prepares to physically drag the bankrupt broker out the back service exit to avoid drawing further public attention. The fortress Blake rented with stolen money now actively rejects him. I watch the guards haul him toward the service doors. The eviction is swift, brutal, and entirely deserved. I turn my back on the pathetic remnants of their ruined dynasty. I walk toward the edge of the stage. Danielle moves seamlessly to my side. She reaches out and loops her arm firmly through mine. She holds her head high. She projects the quiet, undeniable strength of a woman who just survived a lethal extraction scheme. We walk down the stage stairs together in perfect unison. We stride down the center aisle of the deserted ballroom. Our footsteps echo loudly against the polished marble. They replace the sounds of classical music and clinking champagne glasses. We push through the heavy front glass doors and step out into the vast open courtyard. The cool night air hits our faces. It washes away the suffocating toxicity of the pavilion. The flashing lights of the paparazzi cameras are gone. The elite investors have completely vanished into the night. The massive plaza belongs entirely to us. I successfully restored the foundation of my legacy. I protected my daughter from a ruthless predator. I firmly established my absolute power over the empire I built with my own scarred hands. We walk across the concrete and approach my battered brown sedan. It sits parked perfectly between the empty VIP spaces. I unlock the doors. Danielle slides into the passenger seat without a single complaint. She does not miss the luxury cars or the fake prestige. She understands the true value of absolute, unbreakable loyalty. I start the engine. The rusted muffler rumbles to life. I shift the car into gear and drive us away from the glowing waterfront. We leave the smoking ruins of Blake's life far behind us in the dark. The drive away from the glowing waterfront pavilion unfolded in an absolute heavy silence. The rusted muffler of my old sedan rumbled steadily against the freezing night air, a sharp contrast to the silent luxury we had just destroyed. Alicia sat in the passenger seat staring out the window at the passing streetlights. She did not cry for the life she left behind. She shed the toxic weight of Bradley's manipulation exactly as she shed his diamonds on that stage. We arrived at my modest suburban house just before midnight. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt and pushed the door open. The familiar scent of pine wood and old books welcomed us. Alicia walked into the living room and sat on the faded floral sofa. She looked around the small space she once considered an embarrassing relic of her childhood. She finally recognized it for what it truly was. It was an impenetrable fortress built entirely on unconditional love. I walked into the kitchen and brewed a fresh pot of strong black coffee. I poured 2 mugs and carried them back to the living room. I handed her a warm cup. She wrapped her hands around the ceramic and took a slow, deep breath. We did not need to discuss the chaotic events of the evening. The silence between us was no longer fraught with generational tension or social anxiety. It was the deep restorative quiet of a family surviving a brutal storm. The morning sun eventually broke through the living room curtains. The golden light washed over the worn wooden floorboards. We survived the absolute worst betrayal imaginable. We emerged entirely intact. The financial fallout struck the city with the force of a localized earthquake by Monday morning. I sat at my kitchen table and turned on the morning news broadcast. The local anchors reported the catastrophic collapse of Bradley's brokerage firm. The unregulated private equity lenders did not grant him a single day of grace. They executed hostile asset seizures before the sun even rose on Saturday. They stripped his corporate offices bare, confiscated his fleet of luxury sports cars, and locked the doors to his penthouse. The federal authorities intervened shortly after. The news displayed footage of Bradley being escorted out of a downtown precinct in heavy steel handcuffs. The district attorney formally indicted him on multiple counts of severe wire fraud and predatory financial manipulation. He used a voided municipal lease to secure shadow capital. The federal government does not offer plea deals for corporate theft of that magnitude. He faced decades in a maximum security penitentiary. Diane suffered a fate she considered far worse than prison. The elite social circles she worshipped completely eradicated her existence. The aristocratic families of the city deleted her number, banned her from their country clubs, and pretended they never knew her name. She lost her $3 million stolen investment. She lost her pristine reputation. She was forced to vacate her luxury estate and face the brutal reality of absolute poverty. They tried to bury me under a mountain of fake prestige and stolen money. They ended up digging their own permanent graves. I knew I had to show Alicia the true foundation of her inheritance. I did not take her to a sterile bank vault or a towering glass skyscraper. I told her to put on a pair of heavy work boots. I drove her directly to the industrial district on the outskirts of the city. We pulled into the massive, sprawling freight depot I secretly owned. Dozens of 18-wheeler trucks roared to life in the staging yard. Hundreds of men and women loaded heavy cargo pallets, coordinating the logistical heartbeat of the entire coastline. I walked my daughter through the diesel-scented air. I introduced her to the shift managers and the dock workers. I showed her the exact loading bay where I spent 20 consecutive years breaking my back to fund her education. I wanted her to see the sweat, the grit, and the unyielding resilience of our people. I explained that true wealth is not measured by the brand of a suit or the zip code of a penthouse. Real power is built in the shadows through relentless discipline and unwavering integrity. I told her that our ancestors survived unimaginable hardships so we could stand on this ground as owners. I built this logistical empire to ensure she would never have to bow her head to arrogant predators like Bradley. I handed her the master ledger for the holding company. I told her the empire was officially hers to manage. She ran her fingers over the leather binding. She looked at the massive fleet of trucks operating under our family name. She finally understood the immense, unbreakable strength of her blue-collar roots. The deepest lesson I learned from this ordeal is the profound danger of masking reality to protect a child. I spent my entire life hiding my wealth to shield Alicia from greedy opportunists. I lived in deliberate poverty to ensure she valued education over inheritance. My intentions were entirely pure, but my execution created a fatal vulnerability. By hiding the true extent of my power, I allowed her to believe we were weak. I inadvertently pushed her to seek validation and security from the very predators I wanted to avoid. I learned that true protection requires absolute transparency. We must arm our children with the knowledge of their own worth. We must teach them that high society is often a fragile illusion built on debt and deception. Genuine respect cannot be purchased at a country club. It must be forged through character and honor. I realized that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of love. I had to let my daughter step onto a stage of total humiliation so she could see the monster standing beside her. I had to risk losing her temporarily to save her permanently. We cannot fight our children's battles for them. We can only provide the undeniable truth and trust them to make the right decision when the illusion shatters. Alicia and I rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of absolute honesty. We do not hide behind fake smiles or societal expectations. She took over the primary operations of the logistics firm. She applied her elite university education to streamline our supply chains and expand our municipal contracts. We operate a multi-million-dollar empire together, yet we still eat dinner at the same worn wooden kitchen table. We know exactly who we are. We know exactly what we are worth. No one will ever underestimate us again. The money remains a tool, not an identity. We use our capital to fund community programs and scholarships for single fathers working manual labor jobs. We actively uplift the people who share our authentic background. We transformed a traumatic financial betrayal into a generational victory. The scars on my hands are no longer a source of social embarrassment for my daughter. They are a daily reminder of the unbreakable fortitude required to survive in a world obsessed with superficial prestige. We stand firm in our truth, completely unbothered by the judgment of outsiders. We do not need permission to exist in any space. We own the ground we walk on. The journey from the loading docks to the pinnacle of commercial real estate taught me that arrogance is the loudest precursor to destruction. Bradley and Diane operated under the lethal assumption that a man wearing a cheap brown suit lacked the intellectual capacity to dismantle their complex corporate schemes. They believed that structural power exclusively belonged to individuals who spoke in sophisticated financial jargon and drank vintage champagne. They confused aesthetic refinement with actual strategic intelligence. I used their inherent prejudice as my ultimate tactical advantage. I allowed them to underestimate me. I let them build a towering house of cards directly over my territory. I understood that a predator blinded by his own superiority complex will always fail to check the foundational dirt beneath his feet. My silence during their vicious insults was never an admission of defeat. It was the calculated patience of a hunter waiting for the prey to step fully into the snare. If I could speak to any parent navigating the treacherous waters of raising a child in a materialistic society, my message would be unflinchingly clear. Do not allow the world to convince your children that their value is determined by their proximity to elite institutions. The corporate aristocrats who look down upon the working class are often drowning in oceans of unregulated debt. They desperately project an image of invincibility to mask their impending financial ruin. Teach your children to respect the calloused hands that built the infrastructure of their lives. Remind them that generational wealth is not merely about accumulating vast sums of capital in offshore accounts. True generational wealth is the transfer of resilience, unwavering morality, and the courage to walk away from a poisoned table. Alicia had to learn this lesson through the agonizing crucible of public betrayal. She had to watch the man she loved crumble into a pathetic, sobbing shell of a human being the moment his stolen capital evaporated. She had to witness his elite social circle abandon him without a single second of hesitation. She saw the absolute emptiness of the life she thought she desired. Today, my daughter looks at the world with clear, unclouded vision. She no longer seeks validation from matriarchs who weaponize their wine glasses at dinner parties. She does not alter her personality to fit into the suffocating constraints of high society expectations. She commands boardrooms filled with aggressive logistics executives, and she does it with the undeniable authority of a woman who knows she cannot be bought or manipulated. We survived the absolute worst betrayal imaginable because we refused to play by the rules dictated by our abusers. We did not engage in screaming matches or petty social media wars. We utilized the cold, precise machinery of the legal and financial systems to execute a flawless restoration of our dignity. I am 70 years old. I am an African-American father who built an empire in the shadows. I watched my enemies destroy themselves with the very greed they worshipped. I secured my legacy, protected my bloodline, and proved that a father's love is the most dangerous weapon on earth when provoked. What would you have done if you found yourself sitting at that dinner table? Would you have walked away, or would you have triggered the financial trap even sooner? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story of ultimate justice and redemption.